Welcome to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions. Your host tonight is the author of the Pro-Black Compendium and Zuberi and the Maroons of Ma'at, the Pan-African Nationalist, Oni. Oni, what are we discussing tonight?
Peace, family. You're tuning into the Pro-Black Perspective on KWAZ Radio. Today we're going to talk about, Tyler's here. Tyler Solomon's here. He says Oni. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about whether genetics plays a factor into so on and so forth. We're actually going to be promoting some white boy's book. I ain't going to hold you. I haven't read the book yet, but there was a discussion on the Discord where they were talking about, I guess one of the brothers didn't know that Michael Bradley was a white boy, you know? And so he's like, yo, y'all got to read this book. And I was like, okay, I don't really want to be, you know, I try not to promote white boys, but, you know, I have been pushing y'all on that Adam Smith. And sometimes I'll be talking about Karl Marx. So why don't I talk about Michael Bradley? Now, here's the thing about Michael Bradley. I'm going to tell y'all, real talk. He's a race traitor. You know what I'm saying? like, I don't, like, you, like, I don't know if you, like I said, another white boy you could promote, Machiavelli. He's like, because I said there was like three white boys I would promote. Machiavelli, Sun Tzu. I don't know if I said Augustine really, but anyway. But like Sun Tzu and Machiavelli, because they both wrote a book called Art of War. You know, different books, but same name, right? Anyway, what I'm saying is that Machiavelli tells you can't trust traitors. You know? Like, they're good if they're betraying their own people for your people, but you still can't trust them. You know? Yeah, I mean, look, I read books that Tyler says I read them all the time. I just don't want it on record that I'm promoting white boys' books. You know what I'm saying? Like, I read them myself, but, you know, like, I read them myself, but I wouldn't be promoting them. I wouldn't be like, yo, y'all go read this white boy. But like, yeah, I mean, like, at the end of the day, white people, you know, looks like how white people reading the most, white people writing the most, you know? And, you know, I almost feel bad saying they read the most, but, you know, I can't even front, you know what I'm saying? like I can't even make up a story about us reading more than they do. Brother Bakari's here, Peace and Black Power. So yeah. So we're going to go into this white boy's book. But when we are, and speaking of Brother Bakari and Tyler, right? But while we're going to be discussing a race trader, a white race trader for a change, right? We are, if you want to listen to podcasts that do not involve race trader, Kofi's here, by the way. If you want to listen to podcasts that do not involve race traders, here you can check out this. You can check out KWAZ Radio. Y'all see that transition? Come on, give it to me for that.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Pro-Black Perspective on KWAZ Radio.
Yeah, and what I want to say, too, is don't forget about, obviously, Brother Bakari, Forecast, Casidra, Tanzan. I think that's actually it. But, like, I think Buana doing something, too. So make sure you guys check out everybody on the network. We're gonna get a more robust ad so I can actually pour out some water while it's happening. You know, I mean, you should pay attention, but I already, you know, I recorded it. You know what I'm saying? But other than that, yeah, we're gonna go into it. I do want to tell you guys another thing though, which is that I did finally publish my little book, so you guys can check that out. I Can Be a Nation Builder, just straight up to the point. You know, I might change this picture, but I could be a nation builder, just straight up to the point. And you can see, book belongs to, and I mean, I for some reason only show one picture, but you know, basically it's gonna be rhymes. I mean, poetry, black imagery, and, you know, Boys Proud. Y'all see I ordered my copy, so I'm going to get my copy soon enough. But other than that, yeah, that's it. Because I want realistically, the book was really for my son to, have some positive pro-black book in his hands. The thing is that I got a lot of books. Like my son's mother's friend was like, hey, my kids are older. Here's some books, some traditional, a lot of them like traditional African American books. But a lot of it was too religious, or a lot of it was, integration, all that kind of stuff. Dr. King, and oh man, we could finally sit at the, like one of these is like how this little girl's older brother, like I have them, like they're actually right here. Like it's like I don't want to push that on him right now. I don't want to push on to him, hey, it's like Dr. King struggled to integrate. Like that's good, for the time, but it's like, this boy is a little boy. I want him to dream big. I want him to think big. I want him to, not think of himself as, he made it because he's now technically, on paper a first class citizen, or he made it because now people are not hanging him from a tree. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want that sort of, like, I get it. Like, that's a good, like, I don't know if I want to push that on him because he's a little boy. I will, like this kind of article and other kind of things where it's like, yo, this white boy is fucked up. I do want him to think that. But I don't necessarily want him to just think, hey, you know what? Like it's like, I think it was, I don't remember if it was Kwame Ture or Dr. Clark. Somebody said it, but there was something along the lines of, if you start your history with slavery, then everything looks like progress. And it's like, I don't want him to start his history with slavery. Like, personally, I wouldn't even mind if he starts his conception of self with, I can be something. You get what I'm saying? Like, and then of course, you'd also want him, his conception of self to include, I used to have great civilizations. Or his conception of self can be, you know what, these motherfuckers on the other side are fucked up. These white boys is fucked up. You understand? Like, that's how I want it. So that's what that book's about. So hopefully, you guys can cop it too. Obviously, I'm going to cop it because, that's the whole point of writing books. And then y'all see I get the bold naming. Like, I was going to be like, I could be anything, some weak shit like that. But I decided not to do that. Kofi says, truth is better than lies. Yup, all the time. And Tyler says, the influence has to be neutralized. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like when it comes to, like I said, like I got these books, and I'm telling you, it's hard. Because another thing is like the religious thing. Like Brother Makari could tell you, like the church really is like a crutch that black folk, especially in America, well, not just in America, but like everywhere, really. But the church is something that black folk use, so you're gonna see it everywhere. Like even like when I was in Tanzania, women, if you did something good for a woman, she would say, "Thank God," or inshallah, or whatever, inshallah, whatever, or even like, you help her out in need and she's like, may God bless you or something, mundo, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, I did that shit. But like, there's like a deep religious, so I get why it's in the literature. But like, as a person who's not deeply religious and who's not telling my son, like, I might be even, like, I barely even promote Iceman inheritance. Like, fuck, I look like promoting the Bible, right? But like, as somebody who's not even like promoting this conception of, oh yeah, there's this divine entity, like for it to show up in children's books, like I get why, because you're in a Christian culture. But like me personally, I'm like, nah, if I'm gonna give literature, it's not going to be from a Christian or Islamic paradigm. It's gonna be from my own. I mean, not my own, but, just from, like, a non-religious paradigm. And it's not to say I have something against religion, per se. It's just that, I'm not, like, I don't need to promote a religion, But Makari says, facts about celebrities and entertainers. Now, these social media celebs is the same. I didn't even know that Tyler said anything about, I don't see anything about celebrities. Oh, black celebrities and entertainers are part of the machine. Oh, yeah. Black celebrities, yeah. They're definitely, that's one of the issues. So make sure you guys put on live chat instead of top chat, because live chat makes it so it's less censored. Top Chat is like, yeah, we don't want these, whatever. But yeah, black celebrities, yeah, they're. That's what I was telling folk. It's like we don't realize that in order for you to become a celebrity, you have to be bought and paid for. You know what I mean? You have to be bought and paid for. Like, in order for me, in fact, I can show y'all this. That's actually something I wanted to show y'all. But let me see if I could show it without showing too much information. Let me see if I got it. So one thing I could say is this. So I can be a nation builder, right? It has this description. I can be a nation builder, unique children's book, so on and so forth. Now, I realized, right, that these designs were so interesting that I could technically put it on a shirt. Right? I'm like, I could just put this on a shirt. Because I already made the designs, I already had the poetry, and it looks good. I could technically put it on a shirt. So I was like, because I was on YouTube, and they had this thing called Amazon merch. Merch by demand or something like that. Some stupid shit like that, right? So Amazon says, you could just apply to sell merch. So I'm like, okay, let me just make up a brand, Tarated. Who call me? I don't know why these motherfuckers, these people just like, it's like I said about these people, they just like, hold on a second, let me just silence my phone. It's like folk are like, hey, you didn't answer my text, so I'm just going to call you. And it's like, but I'm working. All right. Anyway, so look, I could be a nation builder. So I changed the name to like a brand name, right? And I was like, is a unique clothing line designed to encourage African youth into positive, powerful, productive occupations. It features colorful images and meaningful poetry that suit people of all ages, right? And then I think I took out this line and I said, as we foster a power mindset and understanding of nation building and so on and so forth. So I'm putting this as the brand, right? The brand description. Because I'm like, why am I giving a brand description, right? Tell me why Amazon rejects my application. And it's like, I tell you, like, that's why I said you got to go read, and you don't have to read this guide to understand that you don't just fucking tell everything to your enemy right away. But this is what Machiavelli was saying. He was like pretty much don't let your enemy know what the fucking plan is. Because I could have put anything. I could have left it blank. I could have done anything. I could have been like, I'm going to sell some coon shirts, for, so on and so forth. And they would have been like, approved, right? But instead they were like, nah, this motherfucker's trying to, he's trying us, and so, I said like destiny, common destiny of Pan-African power, all that shit, right? Now, maybe they thought, well, it's not going to sell. Or they thought, this Negro is talking about, Black Revolution stuff. We ain't going to have him. But so I could have showed you guys the letter where they're like, yeah, sorry, we realized thank you for applying, but, we don't want you here. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, I mean, it is whatever. Like, that's my fault, I was feeling good, just published a book. I was feeling good and all that kind of stuff. But that's the thing about white folks, that they understand. You know what I mean? Now, again, like I said, it could just be they realize it ain't going to sell, They don't want to be printing anything. Although I don't think they print it until an order is made. But notwithstanding, they could just be like, I'm never gonna waste your motherfucking time, kid. Or whatever, if they want to call me kid. But I mean, very likely, since there's no actual additional cost for taking me on the merch by demand or whatever, it is what it is. Now, by the way, for those of you who don't know, you can get merch on the KWAZ radio website. So keep that in mind too, and it's some pretty good looking clothing there. So check out that stuff. But anyway, let's jump into the article. So this is Michael Bradley. Let me make sure you guys could see it. Michael Bradley. He says genetics in Western history and religion. So in two books, The Iceman Inheritance, 1978, and Chosen People from the Caucasus, 1992, I've argued that there was an increasingly genetic component to the immense but elusive cultural difference that marks the boundaries between the Mediterranean so-called ancient world and the so-called Judeo-Christian era. Now, I think this is actually pretty important. I want to interject. Those of you who don't know who Michael Bradley is, that's fine. I barely know him either. I never listened to this guy. What I can tell you is that this is the man that this is like the white boy John Henry Clark would do lectures with. You know what I mean? So occasionally you'll see John Henry Clark with a white boy sitting next to him. I never listened to them because that I figured like because John Henry Clark is always talking about religion. I'm not really a John Henry Clark guy either. He's also like a socialist. But that's the thing though. It's like this white boy was pretty big at the time, like in the 80s and so forth, in terms of like black conscious stuff, just for being like a race traitor, just for like saying, you know, white people are inherently like they're Icemen, they're violent, they're, you know, blah blah blah. And so that's where the Iceman inheritance comes from. It looks like he, you know, survived to write more about white folk, but it might even be turning against, you know, the Jews, obviously, because white folk, they try to confuse you and make it seem like, oh well, it's not all of us, you know, when it is, you know. And I mean, again, like all of us is a big statement. Like, is it Ukraine? Obviously, no, I mean, is it Russia? Is it you know, I don't know, Sweden or something. Like you might think those are innocent. I don't, but you know, you might think, oh well, they're not Americans, and they aren't. But again, like this is. Like it is like I do think that there's something to this genetic component as well. Like particularly the I think in the Book of Power we call them hybrids, you know. So like, you know, the fact that they have this Neanderthal ancestry is not like it's not something to like ignore. You know what I mean? Like if a human was part gorilla, you know what I mean? Because like, you know, if y'all saw the other video, the Neanderthal history, like you could be part gorilla. And if you're like part gorilla and you just ignore that, say, yeah, well, this human does have some gorilla ancestry, but that doesn't change who they fundamentally are. And then they're like, you know, just like punching people randomly. And you're like, are you sure that has nothing to do with their gorilla ancestry? And, you know, the other person's like, nah, you just sound like a racist. Like, no, man, I'm pretty sure. Because, like, if you saw how the ancient Neanderthals possibly looked, like, chances are they actually looked like gorillas or like King Kong or some shit, you know, who I think was a giant gorilla. But like, yeah, you know, I have a little bit of theory on that, and I think I might talk about it a little bit. But anyway, let's just make sure that the comments are good, and then Kofi says I listened to them a while back. I think he's talking about the lectures of this Iceman inheritance guy. So the Hebrew invaded Palestine about 2000 to 1700 BC, or so most scholars think, as part of the Hyksos migration southward from the Caucasus mountain region. Okay, so I'm not sure that they're the Hyksos, but okay. Until as recently as 1997, however, no one, including me, could make any constructive or sensible suggestion as to why the Caucasus tribes living around the Black Sea should suddenly have decided to migrate from their presumably original homelands. But migrate they certainly did, and they inundated modern Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and even parts of Egypt as Hittites, Mitanni, Hurrians, Hyksos, and Hebrews. But in 1997, Noah's Flood by Columbia's University oceanographer Walter Pittman and William Ryan was published. Their massive collation of diverse evidence placed beyond any shadow of a scientific doubt the fact that the Black Sea Basin had been flooded in 5600 BC. Now, again, that's much earlier than 2000 BC, right? During the and the thing that we got to realize is that in ancient Egypt, there is discussion of a flood. Okay? So in ancient Egypt, they will say, like the ancient Egyptians will say, I don't know, Kofi said he's tired of the Egyptians. But anyway, ancient Egypt would say that they remember 8 floods, right? Whereas Westerners only remember 1 flood, you know? So, you know, and that's actually possibly true. Because if you see the year, it says 5600 BC, you know, the ancient Egyptians were bragging about how their history goes back 8,000 years, you know, at least. And this is in that one story that I think I showed you guys before. But anyway, so during the last ice age, the present Black Sea has been a fairly large freshwater lake about the size of Lake Ontario. So during the last ice age, oh, by the way, there's also another recent paper saying that the Europeans or the humans at the time in Europe during the Ice Age actually died out. You know, like they actually died out, and they were replaced by another group of humans after the Ice Age. So that's another, interesting tidbit, particularly in light of this Iceman inheritance theory, which also, like, I tell you guys, I want to go into it at some point. There's this two cradle theory, the idea that Northerners have a certain personality and Southerners have a different personality. And I mean, there's some flaws to that theory, beyond that, the ice, the people in the Ice Age might have actually been dead. And that's not the flaw that it is. It's more like how it might be that the nice personality we observe more relates to like the economic structure, i.e., just agriculture, like just might have generally nicer people. And I say that because, like I said, when you read Adam Smith, you also peep that he's talking about the rural personality and how the rural personality was different from the urban personality, which is, and how it kind of parallels the whole two cradle theory thing. So it's a really interesting thing for, I guess, future sociologists or whatever to come across. But all right, so during the last Ice Age, the present Black Sea has been fairly large freshwater lake, about the size of Lake Ontario, roughly 7,500 square miles in surface area. But with the end of the Ice Age, about 11,500 BC, the larger ice caps of the glacial era began to melt, and the world's sea level began to rise. After about 6,000 years of glacial melting, or about 5,600 BC, the sea level had risen by 300 feet worldwide, and this was enough for the Mediterranean to break over the present Bosphorus and cascade down into the Black Sea basin. As we have already seen in the Atlantic, this same 300-foot rise in world sea level flooded the Plato and Atlantis seamounts, and also progressively flooded Brittany's group of offshore islands, once known as Lyonesse. Okay. Saltwater, so again, this is just, European history, I guess, right? But like Atlantis is mentioned in one of these Plato books, so on and so forth. So saltwater poured down into the Black Sea basin at the rate of roughly 200 Niagaras for almost 2 centuries. The fertile steppe land around the wide margins of the former lake were flooded at a rate of about 1.5 kilometers per day until the present, now salty Black Sea reached world sea level. Its present surface area of about 275,000 square miles and its present average depth of about 1,500 feet. Underwater archaeology presently in progress by the famous Titanic finding Ballard team, using remote television cameras and also recovering artifacts from the sea bottom, has already proved conclusively that the margins of the former lake have been very thickly populated before the flood. The bottom of the Black Sea is dotted with numerous wood-built houses and farmsteads. The former inhabitants around the lake and skeletal evidence show that they had marked Neanderthal physical traits, had to flee for their lives as their former grasslands disappeared beneath a gradual but inexorable deluge of Mediterranean seawater. These people were primarily herdsmen of sheep and horses. Hyksos means shepherd kings, and Hebrew apparently signifies minor herdsmen in the ancient Egyptian language. So this would be the Hebrew. The Hyksos would be the shepherd king. So this is actually more relevant because, again, I'm not saying that these are the same group, but and he's also not saying they're the same group either. But sometimes people conflate the two. So the Hyksos could have been. So the whole idea of the like I said, the culture that the two cradle theory discusses, Check on the Job talks about, is the two different economic systems. One of them is the nomadic shepherds. That's what he called the northern cradle. And then the other one is the agricultural people. And that's what he called the southern cradle. And so the nomadic shepherd would have a different cultural structure from the agricultural people. And actually, this is actually pretty relevant. I think we were talking about this yesterday on Shoot the Breeze, that essentially you're gonna have a different value system. Oh yeah, there was this video of this young girl talking about, I don't, I'm not going to submit to, basically she's not going to submit to a black man because he's a slave and she's a slave. So why would a slave submit to a slave type thing? If anything, they're both submit to a slave master. It was kind of ridiculous. But the submission part, so Cheikh Anta Diop does a really good job of describing the nomadic shepherd's culture. And when you understand that the woman in the nomadic shepherd lifestyle, right, is pretty much just like a waste. You know what I mean? Like she's really just there to reproduce. She has no real role in the economy because essentially, like the nomadic shepherd, the way how the nomadic shepherd lives versus the way how the rural person lives is that if you're in a village, right, a woman can do some work, right, because you're in a community, right, and it's pretty freaking safe. It's pretty safe, and she could do the light work while you as a man does the heavy work, right? Farm work is not that complicated. There's occasionally some heavy labor involved, like maybe you need to set up a fence, or maybe you need to pick up, like pull things out of the earth or something. But generally speaking, farming is not heavy labor. Obviously if you do it all day, it's pretty tasking. But, as a man, you like because it's something that like a woman can do physically, right? Like you could share the workload. You know what I mean? Like you have nothing to prove, right? With the nomadic shepherd, it's not the same. You cannot share the workload with a woman because essentially you're walking with your animals, let's say, right? Somebody else who doesn't have animals is going to attack you and take your animals. You get what I'm saying? Like somebody who doesn't have, it's kind of like how the lions do it. Now, I'm not comparing white folk to lions, but what I'm saying is that, only so many men can watch the pride. You get what I'm saying? Or you only need one man, or even say it this way: the women can't watch the pride too, per se. Or for instance, against either the hyenas or against other male lions. Because a male lion could fuck shit up. And a hyena could fuck shit up. So you have the male lion to protect against the hyena. Because I'm not 100% sure, but it might be that the female hyena is actually stronger than the female lion, right? I think that's probably the case. It's probably most likely the case, right? Or the female hyena could organize pretty damn well against the female lion, but she can't take on the male lion. So what happens with the nomadic shepherds is that the male has to do all the economical work. He has to protect the women and children. He has to protect the livestock. He's against, so everybody has to follow behind him. And so then you create this sort of patriarchy. And of course, you create this idea, this mentality, this discipline that the woman has to submit to the man because he's the only one that can earn anything, right? Whereas you wouldn't necessarily have that same conception in an agricultural environment because both of them could be economical entities. You could send a woman to the shop because you're in a peaceful village. You get what I'm saying? You're not in strict competition. Nobody's really hunting you for food for their livelihood because, they have it. A lot of people don't know this about Europe, but it's said that, even when the Romans were there, like in England, for instance, that white folk would just hide in bogs all day, and somehow survive under holes in the ground, just coming up for breath type shit, coming up for breath and food. Now, if you're living in that kind of desperation, yeah, you're going to attack somebody with livestock. They're not growing anything. You know what I mean? They're not growing any food for themselves, and their environment's not, lending toward it. So it's a very different culture, and that culture. So that's where we have that quote unquote patriarchy, that quote unquote submit to the man because of how useless the woman was in their economic system, but you don't have the same parallel in Africa. So that's, I mean, and I'm not saying you don't have it universally in Africa. I'm saying that Africa was predominantly agricultural during the study, and this is partly due to the quote unquote group of people, who's not really a group of people, but the language group, if you will, of the Proto-Bantu and all that kind of stuff. So you will find that Africa was predominantly, and so a lot of us attach that to African culture, right? But not realizing that, yeah, if you have if you have people who have farms and so forth, they're generally not, hunting down and killing each other in the same way that people with like nomads are, not to say that nomads don't form bigger collective groups, but they're also, very hostile to the outside environments. And we see that also in Africa, where right now, in fact, if you talk about North Africa, you're going to see that the part of the divide is that, they don't even talk about it anymore, but I think it was like the Fulani on the top are like the northern herds, like the northern shepherds type thing, the nomadic shepherd types, and the Igbo and the Yoruba are more like the agriculturalists, and they're now bucking, to this day. Anyway, these particular shepherds, however, could not have been very gentle and tolerant. The Caucasus Mountain was the last refuge of the Neanderthal genetic strain or race of people because the glacial climate to which the Neanderthals had adapted lingered in the Caucasus region after the last ice age had ended elsewhere in Europe and Western Asia. This was due to the relatively high average altitude above sea level of this mountainous Caucasus region. Okay, so what he's saying is that during the flood, I guess, people fled into the mountains, right? And then they had their, genetic isolation up in the mountains. And I mean, I'd say this is, I don't know, but this might be a little valid, right? The Alpine foothills in the Balkan Mountains were also something of a refuge for European Neanderthals, and they are remembered as the mountain trolls and gnomes of European folklore. It's probably true too. So fairly pure Neanderthals must have lingered in the higher mountains of Europe until relatively recently. Wow, fairly pure Neanderthals. Can you imagine? But the Caucasus Mountains and the complex jumble of Taurus, Zagros, and Elburz mountain leading from them was the biggest and most recently existing refuge for Neanderthals. So this is where I would offer some evidence, because like he's saying fairly pure Neanderthals must have lingered. Now I like this idea that gnomes and trolls, because like some of you guys might know that I've played Dungeons and Dragons at one point, and that's the kind like fantasy books. I don't really read them personally, but I'm like familiar with European fantasy stories, like not Harry Potter, but pretty much Harry Potter also probably has trolls and gnomes. But like, yeah, it's just pretty interesting to think that when they're talking about like it could be a reference to real life observations. I say this because another European author suggested that in the stories in those fantasy books, that the dragons are a reference to ancient African people, because essentially ancient African people would have dragons on their armor, and I mean, some people might say, well, that sounds ridiculous, except for that, it seems like there is evidence of ancient armory with dragons on it. And not just that, China also randomly has this serpentine being, now other people, in fact, actually my boy Xbox was wondering if dragons and so forth were essentially when ancient people looked at dinosaurs, what they imagined they had looked like based off of the bones they collected, and that's something that we don't really realize. Not to say that, the dinosaur bones were just lying on the surface all the time, because they probably weren't, but it is possible that, you could have stumbled upon some dinosaur bones, or you could have had excavation Because like when we talk about ancient Egypt, one of the things that people don't remember about ancient Egypt is that Lower Kemet, which is the northern part, was actually cleared out. Essentially, it was terraformed. It was like a human excavation project where they terraformed Lower Kemet into becoming habitable. But before they terraformed it, it really wasn't habitable, except for by, essentially like Eurasian types who were living in like swamps and shit. You know what I mean? So basically, these Africans from closer to the interior of Africa went into like a marshland type thing and like fix it up, and they saw that there was a population already there. But my point being that it's possible that people already saw dinosaur skeletons and just speculated on what they would look like. And I think Xbox makes a good case that like nowadays people think dinosaurs have feathers, but like when we were younger, they didn't think they had feathers. They thought they had skin like lizards. So as to say that it's really not that easy to just look at bones and know what the animal looked like. And that could be an explanation for that. So it's just pretty interesting. So there's two different theories. Like obviously, I kind of lean towards the idea that it could have been Africans that the Europeans were thinking these dinosaurs are. But it's also possible that those Africans were looking at dinosaur bones and like, yo, we're going to put this on us because these look like some badasses from the past. But obviously, that's just me, projecting a modern sensibility to, ancient people that nobody even knows. Kofi says, no one has ever discovered dinosaur bones except white and Chinese people. Well, I'm not 100% sure about that. I feel like what happens is that we don't have literature from, like from ancient Africans, so we don't know what they know. You know what I mean? Like there's just no way to know what somebody else knows. There's no way for me to know what my neighbor knows right now, and he's like my freaking neighbor. So it's just imagine somebody living in the space of my neighbor, but 8,000 years ago, or 800 or 80,000 years ago. You know what I mean? Like it's impossible to know what another person knows without, like, it's just really, as far as I can tell, I mean, as far as I can surmise, I think people did see bones elsewhere. Because that's another thing to remember too, is that a lot of times these anthropologists in Europe, they go to Africa after somebody in Africa discovers something. You know what I mean? So like that Ishango bone, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that maybe somebody in the town of Ishango found a bone. Like it could have been an anthropologist at that point, but somebody in Ishango found a bone and they were like, oh wow, this might be a good excavation site. So I think that's a possibility. Like I don't know if nobody else. Now what I can say is that I don't think anybody outside of America saw a UFO. I don't think anybody outside of America saw a UFO. Kofi says dinosaur bones are still being discovered, or so they say. I believe it's fake. Well, I don't know. I don't know if these white boys could have faked. Because the thing about the dinosaur bones too is that they were from an era way before people faking stuff. You know what I mean? Not before people faking stuff, but before the political, I don't know, the brouhaha about faking things. Because another thing is like, why would you fake dinosaurs? Like it doesn't even make any sense. Like it just seems a little creative. But I mean, I don't know. Like I said, who knows? Like again, you can't know. It's actually hard to know things. So there's one of these ancient Egyptian wisdom teachings, if you will, was along the lines of our senses seek to affirm, not to know. Right. So you're not going to like more or less when you see something, it's more or less going to affirm something for you, but it's not going to make you know something. Now, granted, you can, like, there are things you can know, right? Like what shade, like what complexion I am, you can know that. But it's more so like it's more so a matter of, affirmations in a sense. But anyway, let's see. But this is actually pretty interesting, the Neanderthal thing. But like I think finding Neanderthal bones is like it's like the same as, you know, people finding lithium now in Iran, like, you know, or finding, you know, dragon or dinosaur bones and so on and so forth. Like, yeah, you know, observations are, you know, better and more robust. And not just that, it's like we have to realize that's another thing that we kind of underestimate. I want to go into that a little bit. We underestimate the human capital involved in finding things. You know, the reason why we don't find things, at least today, right, is because we're not looking for anything. You know, I mean, it reminds me of when we were all younger. We all knew about Chinese food in America. We all knew about Chinese food and how they deliver to your house, and we thought to ourselves, man, you know, I think McDonald's would sell more if they delivered. Or we would go to a black restaurant and be like, I think you guys would sell more if you delivered, right? But ain't none of us came up with an app like Uber Eats or Grubhub. You know, we all heard of there's an app for that, so on and so forth. But none of us did it. So it's just like, you know, it's just like how you say, like, they're still discovering dinosaurs. They're still discovering new fucking apps. Not discovering, they're making them, but they're still discovering new apps or new ways to make apps, to make money, to make life more convenient, to make money, right? I probably should have said to make money at the end. But the thing is that, yeah, like we're not looking for it. We weren't trying to build it. We occasionally we're like, hey man, you know, we could have a black Twitter, and like, you know, what happens? Or maybe somebody does build it and nobody shows up and all that kind of stuff. Even the same as like right here, I make this book and it's like, here's a black book, and then people are like, yeah, well, you know, I just wish Marvel made a black book for us. Like, what? Why would Marvel make a black book for you? You know what I'm saying? I made a black book for you. Go get it, you know? But like, are people like I mean, at some point we have to, at least me, I will concede that like these white boys are active. You know what I mean? So, you know, if they discover something, it's because they built anthropologists to go to remote regions of the world and look at it, you know? Because like even when I was in Tanzania, I could say that. I go to Tanzania, I'm chilling in Dar es Salaam. Now I was going to explore the rest of the country, but I was like, yeah, actually this language barrier is kind of tough, right? But I was going to explore the rest of the country. These white folk, these elderly white folk went to Africa. No, in fact, before I went, my son's mother was like, just don't go to the border of Tanzania and Mozambique. And I'm like, why the fuck would I be in the border of Tanzania and Mozambique? There's like nothing there. You know what I mean? There's nothing there. Now, like I said, I met these white folk who were fucking living in the borders of Mozambique and Tanzania, where there are regular murders, regular like a terrorist cell there, but there's also a group of African people there. And so these white folk are going to this remote ass village, right, where I think they said they were like they're the only 5 white people there, right? Two of the only 5 white people there. They're going to this remote village and teaching the kids English. You know, like they have this. Some of them have this adventurous, you know, adventure time. You know, whatever. I don't know. I think it's a show actually, but they have that. Like some of them have that. So they're going to discover shit that you're not going to discover if you're just chilling around in Dar es Salaam going to restaurants like I was. Like I'm not going to. I'm still learning, but I'm not going to discover things about the underdeveloped parts of like the more underdeveloped parts of Africa, based off of going to the most developed city there. You know, and by developed I don't mean like Western developed. I just mean like it's highly populated. You know, and there's like a lot of complex human exchanges and interactions. You know. Anyway, let's keep reading though, because this article seems like it might be long. I feel like whatever. All right. So whether fairly pure Neanderthals still exist or not is a highly controversial matter. Whether they still exist. Okay, guys. As of the 1950s, it was accepted by anthropologists that some local populations in the mountainous regions of Europe, Italy's spine, the massive central of France, the Balkans, etc., were very close to being Neanderthals for all practical purposes. Wow. Some populations of the Caucasus and other Middle Eastern mountain chains still exhibit more extreme Neanderthal skeletal characteristics than the type specimen, a French Neanderthal dated to about 50,000 BC. It is now politically even incorrect even to suggest such a thing. Yeah, so that's actually pretty interesting. So they're saying that there might even be some like super Neanderthals in the so on and so forth. This is pretty interesting. Because again, like that's another thing. Like when Kofi says, hey man, they're still discovering things. The reality is this, that we're not up to date with the sciences. Like we don't have the scientists going around doing these tests. Like, because I don't even know what this local population is. But these white boys have it. And that's something that we we have to, like, we just take that L. You know, like if this white, like what Kofi's saying, hey, they're the only ones finding these dinosaurs. They're also the only ones finding Neanderthals. You know? Like they're also the only ones finding Neanderthals. Or the only ones finding, whatever, you could say artificial intelligence or rocket technology or what was it called? Here's another one. They're the only ones finding superconductors. You know what I mean? Like metals that are superconductors for some reason. Like, because again, they're the only ones looking, And I mean, a part of it relates back to the university thing. I think I'm gonna. I mean, obviously, people aren't really buying my books like that. So I keep saying I'm writing another book, and it's not that motivating to write books that nobody's buying. But notwithstanding, I still want to write a book on the three institutions, right? So obviously, usually I would just say Boko Waset Nakeru. I realize nobody knows what I'm saying because, again, nobody's buying the books, so they don't know that I'm referencing a chapter. I'm referencing a fundamental concept in one of my books. So I changed the language a little bit. I'm gonna make it English a little bit and make it so that because again, like you give it an African name, people are not gonna get you, right? But like even in Africa, they're not gonna get you. But so you would say you as an African individual, right? You can engage three local institutions. Oh, three, not local, but three institutions, right? Your local school system, okay? Your local school system, your local national university, right? Or your local university, but your local national university, and then your local or national political party, right? You engage those three institutions. And then the question of how do you engage it? Well, you can, for instance, like for the primary school or even for the high school, you could be like, here, get these, order these books. Give the students these books, right? Or let the teachers talk about the Neanderthals and the latest science that we know of, right? You could include this right here. Like you could find this paper that describes the closest people to Neanderthals for all practical purposes. You could insert that into the local curriculum or the university curriculum or whatever. You can talk about the superconducting metals. You can talk about artificial intelligence, have the kids up to date on artificial intelligence, straight out of whatever. You could talk about, you could screen the movies on AIs and the dangers of AIs and all that kind of stuff. Like there's so much that you can do and be active in those three fundamental institutions, two of which are educational institutions, but the three fundamental institutions, the political party that's whatever, right? That's funding either the schools better or even funding the research teams to find out, well, who are the fucking Neanderthals? Where are the fucking dinosaur bones? All that kind of stuff. But like that's a because I feel like that's a practical application to this Pan-African nationalism, but also that is what it is. Like it is what it is. But you guys get it. I don't know why my chest is not feeling great. It's not politically incorrect, even just a thing. All right, the Neanderthal culture and society has already been shown to be extremely aggressive and xenophobic towards anyone who is different in culture or physical appearance from themselves. There are both theoretical reasons and also actual cultural religious evidence indicating that the strongly Neanderthaloid people have an anti-feminist mindset and tend to worship male sky gods, not female earth mothers. The evidence is too complex and too specialized to cover in this appendix and can only be touched upon if it is mentioned at all in a book about the Jesus voyage. Now, by the way, this is from Michael Bradley's website, and it's the fourth appendix, okay? But there is one Neanderthal characteristic that is, and you guys can see the link in the description, but there is one Neanderthal characteristic that is not shared by any other fossil or living human population. This must be explained at least superficially if we are to understand Western religion and Western civilization. And it must also be of crucial importance in understanding of the Western world's religious history. Although literally dozens of Ice Age Neanderthal cave sites and rock shelters have been excavated and investigated, not one Neanderthal cave painting has ever been found, right? So what am I doing? So I just got to let you guys know, the reason why I'm messing up at reading is because for some reason my chest is like in pain. Kofi says, they looking for their ancestors. We not doing research on our backgrounds as much. Yeah, exactly. We're not like, that's the thing. Like, cause I mean, like, and I mean, I'm not going to say, yeah, I mean, I should say we're not because, and again, no, I shouldn't say we're not. But what I want to say is this, that when you have the university system, you then produce anthropologists whose specialization, who are paid to look into their ancestry. You get what I'm saying? Like this is a cultural group paying people to specialize in looking in their ancestry. Most African people are not specialized in anything, really. You know, maybe at this point, like when I was in Africa, most people would have specialized in sex, prostitutes, in driving, what are they called? I don't remember what they're called, but like basically Uber, you know, whatever. Specialized in cooking, you know, chefs. Specialized in, I mean, I did go to a farm, so they were specialized in farming, but people out in the city, they were not specialized in farming. I mean, like, that's pretty much it. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe there were other businesses I guess there were people who were working in retail, which was like considered a good job. You know what I mean? But like generally speaking, and this is just generally speaking for like even in the Western world, you don't, like most people are not really specialized in much. Now, what I can say is that in the Western world, you will have programmers, obviously. You will have people who are, like, you have a lot of teachers. And I'm not saying that there weren't teachers in Tanzania. Remember that I still had that language gap and I had, like, no business going to a school, you know? So there were obviously teachers. Like, I did date a teacher and a doctor, whatever, right? But anyway, I'm going to go on a list, right? But like, most people are not specializing in anthropology. You know, most people generally around the world, but some people are. And that's why I keep stressing that you want to be a part of the university system so that you can have university people. But remember that the anthropologists need patrons. They need somebody to pay them to take these trips and live somewhere for 3 years, you know, in some caves or in some woods or some shit, you know, looking at rocks and collecting artifacts and pottery pieces and trying to put them together. It's not really something you can do on a whim. I know guys remember so some woman I was dating in America liked Harry Potter. No, not Harry Potter, Jurassic Park. So we watched it together. And I think in the beginning of Jurassic Park, like there's an anthropologist and he's talking with his financier, you know, who's like, hey, look, I want you to do so on and so forth. But like usually a lot of the sciences are supported by either the government, right? That's why it comes back to the political party, or private wealthy individuals, which, you know, Africa doesn't have in abundance per se, especially not people who are worried about, like, you know, discovering shit. You know what I mean? More or less, you know, just using like I said, the sex labor that you can have access to. Anyway, although literally dozens of Ice Age jails covered, there's no cave paintings have been found, which is pretty interesting. Although they were large-brained and intelligent, their intelligence was not artistic or creative in a visual way. This makes Neanderthal intelligence and mental orientation significantly different from all other ancestral human populations. And by the way, there's a whole bunch. I think it looks like he's about to go into it, actually. There may be an evolutionary reason for this. The National Geographic reported that many skeleton remains of hominids similar to Homo habilis had rather surprisingly been discovered in the Caucasus Mountains of the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. Homo habilis, and that's what I'm saying, like the Soviet Republic of Georgia, like most African people have not even gone to Georgia, let alone the caves of Georgia, you know? I could say that I was supposed to go to Mount Kilimanjaro, but I didn't. I think a lot of people do go to Mount Kilimanjaro, but probably not walking like, in, the sections that are, off limits. You know what I mean? Which is understandable. I actually was in Georgia, America, and I went to Stone Mountain. That was interesting. Now, that was a Klan hideout at one point. And so I did walk somewhat around it, like off the beaten path, but it's not like I would discover anything now. But like most people were not walking off the beaten path because there's no reason to. But there are some people who are paid to walk off the beaten path and like deep off the beaten path. And we don't really have that many people that we're paying to do that. So I think that's the reason why we have less discoveries. But it's something that we can do if we wanted to. Homo habilis was previously known only from East Africa and dated to about 1 to 3 million years ago. Some features of these bones, notably the lower jaw, seem to be quite similar in some characteristics to typical Neanderthal jaws. Neanderthals may, note the emphasis, therefore have evolved from this early hominid. Homo habilis is thought to have been human, all right, but not the branch of Homo that evolved into present and modern day humanity. Although there is presently much controversy about it, Neanderthals were once classed as Homo sapiens neanderthalis, that is, a separate race or subspecies of modern humanity, Homo sapiens sapiens. These days, though, it is not polite to suggest that there are physically identifiable genetic races of humanity with different mental and emotional characteristics. Unfortunately, however, the National Geographic's article at least suggests that the older politically incorrect perspective was probably factually correct after all. Neanderthals may have come from another type of mankind. So I'm not 100% sure what this was about. But yeah, this was kind of like what I want to write though. So I might have to like take a note of this. But I kind of want to write something that, says that humans, genetic races of humanity with different mental and emotional characteristics. Because I do think that's a truth. Whether I agree with this white boy or not, I do think that that's some truth to that. Bit of medicine's here. Bit of medicine kept us up till 4 a.m. last night. I don't know if that's, yeah. It was until 4 a.m. last night. All right. It was a good program, good show. Make sure you guys check out the playback. We went in on Marxism yesterday until this young brother started shouting at us that we should be socialists. Anyway, let's go up going. Neanderthals may have been able to draw or paint, but they were, however, obsessed by numbers. No, may not have been able to draw or paint. I was like, what? All right. But they were, however, obsessed by numbers, like the count on Sesame Street. They could not help but tally and enumerate things. Yeah, this dude, that's just... This dude was just rude right there, yo. And the weird thing is that, like I said, this is a race trader, man. This is his own ancestry. You know what I mean? Yeah, how you gonna throw in the Sesame Street? That's just jacked up. All right, anyway, like the count on Sesame Street, man. Anyway, the first known human evidence of time-factored living are Neanderthal records of lunar phases or menstrual cycles, scratched on bone that date from about 50,000 BC. This predates the famous Western European cave paintings by about 20,000 years. So, I mean, again, the Shango bone is another one of those lunar phase bones. But anyway, Alexander Marshak, in his Root of Civilization, illustrated many examples of Neanderthal numerical notation, and he showed that they were just as important to the development of civilization as the artistic intelligence of Western European cave painters. In fact, as Marshak demonstrated, the Neanderthal penchant for playing with numbers was probably more important for the development of mathematics, surveying, physics, science, and technology than Western European artistic ability. Now, again, this is how white people write out black folk history. Black folk out of history in the sense that... the Western Europeans got the mathematics, in a sense, from Africa. But anyway, in terms of easily seen improved cultural impact on Western civilization, this means that it is still possible to draw a line on a map from about the German-Polish border on the Baltic Sea to the Italian-Yugoslav, now Croatia, I think, border on the Adriatic Sea. You still find that the acknowledged world... See, now, here's one thing I want to say in a book. If you're writing a book that's supposed to be factual, do not include... I mean, the joke wasn't that bad, but do not include now Croatia, I think. I mean, you have all the time in the fucking planet. Just figure it out. Or even don't say I think, just say now Croatia as some would reason. You know what I mean? Like... Or as evidence suggests, you know, just seem a little bit more, because like, who the fuck are you? You know what I mean? Just generally speaking, try to seem a little more confident. And that's just generally in life, right? You will find that acknowledged world-class artists were generally born west of the line, while a disproportionate number of world-famous mathematicians, physicists, musicians, and composers lived east of it. Music is, of course, an appreciation of numerical proportions expressed in sound. Okay, so I think I messed up this. So in terms of easily seen improved cultural impact on Western civilization, this means that it's still possible to draw a line on the map from the German-Polish border, so on and so forth, on the Adriatic Sea. You will find that acknowledged world-class artists were generally born west of the line, while a disproportionate number of world-class famous mathematicians, physicists, musicians, and composers lived east of it. Music is, of course, an appreciation of numerical proportions expressed in sound. Okay, so he's saying that the reason why you'll find... So he's like, in this part of the world, people to the east were better mathematically than the people to the west. But again, like, it's just like pseudoscience, honestly. But anyway, this line is also the boundary that separates good chess players from obsessive ones. And while also separates the extremely wide EEE men's common shoe size of Eastern Europe from the narrow men's feet of the West. EEE shoes are not normally manufactured west of today's Czech Republic. Neanderthal had very wide feet, a wide plantar index. So this is something more provable, more distinct. But essentially what he's alleging, and it's pretty clear, I guess, but he's saying that the people in Eastern Europe were more Neanderthal than the people in Western Europe, which is ironic because, again, the Western European is the one who did all the fuck shit to you. You know what I mean? The Eastern European might have done some fuck shit once upon a time, but the people who recently did fuck shit to you are the Western Europeans. So this line was more true before 1800 than it is today, of course. 2 centuries of relatively fast and inexpensive travel has allowed people to intermarry and mix their genes. Nonetheless, even now, the line remains at least roughly valid. I have suggested in various writings, including the Iceman Inheritance and Chosen People from the Caucasus, that Neanderthals must have been fascinated with the number 1 or 1. It is a sudden difference between nothing and something. Everything that exists can be viewed as the multiples of 1, but without 1 there is nothing. I have suggested, therefore, that Neanderthals and highly Neanderthaloid people had an inbred or genetic tendency towards monotheism, the conception of just one God who created everything. And because they apparently could not render anything visually, the Neanderthal one God would have been a totally abstract entity. So again, I would, as much as I don't like monotheists, I would still put this in the pseudoscience realm. You know, I put this in the pseudoscience realm. Although what's interesting, for those of you who might not know the back history of monotheism, and in fact Freud explores it himself, but essentially they're saying it might have been Atenism from Akhenaten or Amenhotep IV. The thing about Amenhotep IV, though, is that he does get his religious belief, in a sense, from foreigners. You know, so the Asians do bring in that like quote unquote religion of peace type thing. Now, whether they're doing it because they believe it or because they're trying to sabotage ancient Egypt from the inside, I mean, obviously, I think they believe it, obviously, and they just ended up sabotaging ancient Egypt at the same time. Is another thing. Now, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what this is. I would look into it, but it seems pretty valid. I'm not. Like, it seems pretty valid. I mean, not valid, but it's not something that I guess, like I said, I'd say it's pseudoscience, but I wouldn't necessarily dismiss it outright as pseudoscience. I think it's worth exploring because where humans come up with because I used to just think that they just misunderstood African spirituality, but it could be that they do have a tendency towards well, I'm not going to say they have a tendency towards monotheism because that doesn't make much sense. in light of the fact that the Greeks had a plurality of deities, and not just that, but like actually a lot of these groups had a plurality of deities. So like Alat, which is the like the precursor to Allah. Alat was like a female fertility, whatever. So like the Vikings also had like their Norse mythology. The Greeks had their Greek mythology, so on and so forth. I don't really think that these people tended towards, had a tendency towards monotheism. I don't see the evidence for that. Not saying that's not the case, because again, he's talking about a particular subset of Europeans, and I don't really know what subset he's talking about, because nobody know, because he didn't really say, because again, it's just speculation. But so I wouldn't necessarily put it that way. I would say that it seems like Atenism. So Atenism is more like, so to give you guys a context, so ancient Egypt had its plurality of deities, and I guess one of them represented the sun, and so the sun, like if you were to, like let's say if one represents the sun, another one represents plants, another one represents, the mind, another one represents whatever, right? Somebody could say, you know what, the most important thing is the sun, and in the same sense, somebody could say the most important thing is water. There's actually like an ancient Greek person who said water is the most fundamental element on the planet. But like Atenism is essentially actually the sun is the most important. Which is not necessarily the case, although we are in the solar system, right? So maybe it's not too invalid. But it's not necessarily the case. But then essentially you get that quote unquote monotheism when you lift the sun above everything else. You would then say, well, the sun is superior, right? And remember that some of them represented like dark matter, some of them represented, the Big Bang, some of them, like noon and like the void of space and all that kind of stuff. So it's not like don't just get sold on the sun part, because I know somebody's like, well, the sun is pretty damn fucking good, right? Like, yeah, in the solar system, but not outside of the solar system. Either way, yeah. So the sun is what they're worshiping, and then eventually this Atenism grows into, like this, like not grows into, but like an offshoot of Atenism becomes Judaism. You know what I mean? Or an offshoot, and then the offshoot of Judaism becomes Christianity, and an offshoot of Christianity becomes Islam. But like Atenism as the root, but Atenism existed in a not a monotheistic tradition, but it was just, Aten was just one of the many nature at that time. And then of course, like it became, well, this is the supreme nature. But again, it's not uncommon for one nature to be considered the supreme nature, because you have, generally in Africa, what you had at the time was Amun was the supreme nature. But Amun represented like blackness, You know what I mean? So it's like, is it the sun, or is it, like the Africanness? You know what I mean? Kind of thing. So that's why a lot of them were. And I'm not simplifying Amun like that. I just, but like Amun was considered the top in ancient Egypt among the others, whereas Aten would have not really factored in. And again, like it's really complicated, but long story short, I would probably lean this towards monotheism. I mean, I would lean this towards pseudoscience, like just a white boy, again, misunderstanding quote unquote spirituality or science or whatever. But I wouldn't necessarily dismiss it outright just off of that. I would, because I don't know what group he's actually discussing. I don't know what group he's actually discussing. Bitamed said, my watch doesn't update automatically, which is why I'm late. I thought it was just 11 a.m. now. Classic. This brother was up and telling us to update our locks. As soon as you saw that, you should have updated your clock. This brother. And he going by a watch, man. Y'all see him? Like, what year is this? All right. Hey, also, simply because they could not draw or paint very well, right, and did not value or respect the ability, the Neanderthals and highly Neanderthaloid people would have tended to have viewed the figurative arts, particularly the religious arts, of other people as blasphemy and idolatry. So again, this is like projecting, kind of, I would say this is more like, I mean, again, somebody with a critical lens would look at this and be like, this is just projecting. This is just kind of like seeing the answer and then trying to work a theory around the answer. You know, it's not, it's like, I think it's, I can't remember, I think it's inductive as opposed to deductive, right? Or maybe deductive, I don't remember, I don't remember those terms, right? But I think one of them is that you would have the evidence and then try to form a theory based off of the evidence and then check to see if the rest of the evidence works out along with it. And the other one is like, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, oh, okay, I see, like as a cheat sheet, you know, it's like, oh yeah, they think, oh, the religious art is idolatry. Well, I think the reason why they do that is because they can't paint. Ha ha ha. You know, like no. You know, like I wouldn't put that in. So anyway, so in some of Neanderthal characteristics, we have a very highly numerical and logical intelligence. And again, I don't know. He's just saying that high aggression. I would give that to white folk. Male dominance, anti-feminism, xenophobia, materialism. If you can count them, they're real. And a proclivity towards monotheism as Neanderthal mental traits. They remain as mental tendencies of highly Neanderthaloid populations. So again, there's materialism. We talk about that, dialectical materialism and stuff. Again, I would say this male dominance, anti-feminist, xenophobia relates to the economic model we've seen. And I think Cheikh Anta Diop does a really good job in explaining like just the day-to-day lives of these ancient Europeans, and like why it would be male dominated, you know, or why it would be xenophobic. And I mean, I would give him credit for that. Materialism, if you can count them, they're real. I mean, I'm actually sympathetic to this, you know what I mean? I'm actually sympathetic to that. Proclivity towards monotheism, so on and so forth. But again, like it doesn't really seem like Europeans were always monotheistic, because again, I mean, obviously the Greeks took the like their mythological canon from Egypt, so I can't necessarily say one way or the other whether that is a factor into this. I mean, and I guess I could say that like Cheikh Anta Diop outlines that they worshipped fire at one point. You know, like the Europeans generally worshipped fire. I don't know if that was monotheistic. In fact, it seemed more like it was materialist, right? We could count fire, you know. You know, I mean, I think that the religion came into, Europe, not organically. You know what I mean? It seems like it came in through Africa, particularly this individual named Ram, who purposely made it so that Europeans would stop fighting each other if they took on the religion of white folk. And this is what white people are telling you, you know? So like, again, I would broaden my historical understanding, and I would just look at this more like, again, there's some valuable things here. Like, oh, there are some size differences in Western and Eastern Europe. And there is, you know, evidence of Neanderthals today. That's useful. But other stuff I would just not dismiss, but I would just take with a grain of salt. Because again, that's what white people are. I would just take them with a grain of salt. Like, again, I wouldn't even actually recommend this book based off of what I'm reading right now. Because I'm just like, like, I kind of felt like, you know, when Dr. Clark was parading this guy, it was like a feel good. You know, there's a lot of confirmation bias in the pro-black circles, where it's like, if this person, like, oh, like for instance, like recently there was this athlete who was like, I'm not free unless the Congolese are free. And it's like, that's a confirmation bias. Because you, like, and everybody and their mama is just pointing this guy. And it's like, if he was saying some fuck shit, you'd have been like, shut the fuck up, you stupid celebrity. But because he's not saying fuck shit, it's like, oh yeah, listen to this celebrity. He's the GOAT, you know? And it's like, that's confirmation bias, where you're just like, or echo chamber, if you will, but that's a confirmation bias in the sense of, you know, if you generally say, don't listen to celebrities, and and then you suddenly are like, listen to this guy because he's saying what you want him to say, that's where, you know, it's like circular. Like it's not really as productive as you might think it is. You know, so if you're like, hey, don't listen to white folk are lying, white folk are the devil. Only time you know when white folk is telling the truth is when their mouth is moving. No, only time you know if a white person is telling a lie is when their mouth is moving, right? If you say that and then it's like, oh, this white man, listen to him. It's like, And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that I never like put a white person's book out, because I obviously would and do. I'm not really so on and so forth. But I'm not, but again, at least you can, like, one thing you're gonna hear from me is take it with a grain of salt. You know? That's one thing you're gonna hear from me. Or even as Garvey said, you know, there wasn't any good white folk writing about African history. You just have to, but you can glean what could be, like, again, like I say, look at what could be factual. You know, look at what could be factual. But anyway, so the Great Black Sea flood of 5600 BC caused the Hyksos and Hebrews to scrabble over the coastal mountains of modern Turkey and the former Soviet Republic of Georgia and trek down the Euphrates Valley. So the flood caused them. This led them eventually to Sumeria. This was not a purposeful migration towards a known destination. The Caucasus and Taurus Mountains had insulated these people from the outside world, and it's highly unlikely that they knew anything about the cities of civilized Sumeria. At least no evidence of cultural contact between the Caucasus and Sumeria before about 3000 BC has so far been discovered. These cities has been founded by representatives of the old European goddess-worshipping civilization called the Ubaid culture by archaeologists sometimes around 8,000, 7,000 BC, while en route towards India. So again, these cities, the Sumeria, actually it seems like they were black, but he's going to make it seem like they're white, right? It looks like it. The old European goddesses, right? Goddess-worshipping civilizations. Again, agriculture, so on and so forth. The Black Sea refugees simply moved slowly down the Euphrates Valley as available grazing for their herds dictated. They reached the vicinity of Ur in Sumeria by about 3000 BC. By about 2000 BC, they crossed Syria into Palestine. By 1700 BC, they had invaded the northeastern part of Egypt's Nile Delta, adjacent to Palestine, and called Goshen in the Bible, right? So again, these are, now he kind of just glosses over it, but this was like a violent invasion. They took over Sumeria and all that kind of shit. Archaeologists can roughly trace and date this migration by a trail of domesticated horse bones. I'm sorry, I know some people might be like, well, violent, or, you know, what way? Because some people would also say that they integrated into the societies, you know, so these people might have tried to civilize them and, you know, paid the price later on. So just a FYI. So anyway, archaeologists can roughly trace and date this migration by a trail of domesticated horse bones. These Caucasus people had domesticated the wild Ice Age horses, tarpans, which lingered on the steppes. I kind of want to look up tarpans. The first domesticated horse skeleton so far discovered in ancient Egypt date from about 1650 BC in the Nile Delta, giving archaeologists a rough date for the arrival of the Hyksos and associated Hebrew there. So I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like he's also saying that the people who domesticated horses were these Caucasus people. I cannot tell, you know, but like I don't know how many people were riding horses in Africa. Like I don't, you know, before the arrival of the European in 1650 BC. So I don't know. But it's a pretty interesting theory, because one of the things that people know also about the Hyksos was that they had very fast cavalry. You know, they had very fast chariots. Unlike ancient Egypt. Now, I don't know if that means ancient, because what this is suggesting is that ancient Egypt did not have chariots at all. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they did, you know? In fact, I think there are images of ancient wars in ancient Egypt. I know, right? Ancient Egypt. I think there were artifacts of ancient wars. And what I would say is that I think there were chariots already in the early wars. And now that I think about it in retrospect, I think that there were horses in ancient paintings in Africa. I'm not saying I don't remember if there were people riding the horses. which would be the difference between a domesticated horse and a horse. But I don't know. I couldn't say off the top of my head, which is, again, that's my fault. Or that's even our people's fault, in the sense that we should have been active in the school system, like I said, the 3 institutions, to point out, well, these are horse imagery, this is so on and so forth. There's this book, I want to tell you guys, really interesting book by this brother named Adu Rafo. You guys should check it out. You should check him out. He's a pretty cool guy. One of his books goes over some some paintings inside of ancient Egypt. And it was like one of the most interesting things. I had to buy the book. I don't know the veracity. Right now, I haven't seen anything like it since. But they're showing writing inside of a pyramid. And in this pyramid, the most interesting writing you could think of shows up there, right? And I mean, obviously, if this was interactive, I would ask you guys to guess. I guess I can't. But the art suggests, or like what you see in the painting, what you see in the pyramid, right, which is like some secluded, isolated, environment, is the quote unquote Arabic numbers, and that was like really interesting. So I think I want to look up and see if I can find that again, because it's just like, what? But that's another piece of image that, like, it sticks with you, and makes it so that it just gives you something to think about. And like, you could give it to your kids. Now, I don't know the veracity or the truth of it, so I can't necessarily say give it to your kids. But like, that's the kind of stuff that people are exposed to. In fact, I could say this, a long, long time ago, one of the most like images are so important. There's actually an ancient Egyptian, I don't want to say proverb, but like in ancient Egypt, they would talk about how images are just that much more important. Like, just having an image is that much more important. And I could go back, like, all of us can recall a really impactful image we've seen in our youth that kind of shaped us towards some sort of mindset. And I think one of them that I saw was this photograph of this black man, I guess, who was holding up a picture saying, abortions kill this many black people, a year. And when I saw that as a young person, I was like, what the fuck, I did my little research, and I mean, I'm not still as anti as I once was, but what I could say is that, yeah, like powerful images are really something. So when I talk about engaging the public fool system, if you will, or the public school system, if you're somewhere positive, I mean, like, yeah, you can put those powerful images into people's faces. Now, you might have to use some money, so you should collect money for that particular thing. You should collect money from the community to, boost up your own education system. But like, yeah, and again, who decides the images? It should be you, Well, not should be you, but you get what I'm saying. Like, you should have a part in that kind of thing, because if you don't give the images, somebody else could. You can give, because what you're going to find inside of the public fool system or the public whatever, like, I could say this. If I say the word lynching, right, what the fuck I'm talking about. Like, what it looks like. It's burned into your head. Especially if you're in America. It's burned into your head. My son doesn't. Just FYI. If I say lynching, he's not, oh my gosh, a tree, a noose. He's not. And I'm not saying that's good or better than knowing about, because like, if a white man's walking around with a noose, it's better to know what the fuck he's on to, obviously. But, again, that's like living in fear, though. It's like instilling fear, another thing. Let me actually try to hurry up, because this article's long, and I didn't realize I was reading so slow. All right, so the quasi-military operations may be the real reason why the Hebrew tribes resided in northeastern Egypt for a time. The Bible is confused about the length of their residence in Goshen, 4 centuries or 4 generations. To complete the story, these Hyksos, so again, I don't think that the Hebrews and the Hyksos are the same people. These Hyksos and Hebrews were expelled from Egypt between 1550 BC and 1350 BC by a counteroffensive launched by the Egyptian prince of Thebes. This counteroffensive was initially led by Amos I, and its success founded the 18th dynasty and began the so-called New Kingdom of ancient Egypt. After 200 years of sporadic fighting, the expulsion from Egypt of hated Asiatic shepherds was finally complete. This final expulsion seems to have been the Exodus of the Bible. So again, I do not think this is I don't think the Hebrews, the Jewish story is a real story. I think what the Jews had is that they might have been some people in Egypt, right, who studied history, like who studied in Egypt, and then they made up a group based off of history. Like, not to say that they were the people, but that there was a historical people and they just took up that identity. You get what I'm saying? So it's to say that you don't read this book to say, oh, this is what the Hyksos thought, you know? But more or less you read this book to say, oh, okay, there was, like, this is what the ancient Egyptians taught. You get what I'm saying? And then there's a people who were like, a people without history who then took up a history for themselves. And I mean, you might be like, well, who the fuck does that? That's not a real thing. But then, like, realistically, that's all we see today. You know, like for instance, like the classic example is like the FBA ADOS, you know, type thing where it's like, suddenly they're like a historical people. You know what I'm saying? Based off of an actual people, let's say Africans in America, who have a real history, but were not like delineated, and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? They were not delineated and pure, and all that kind of stuff. But then the people today who might look like Yvette Carnell are going to be like, oh yeah, I'm from a stock of, you know, so on and so forth. Kind of like this guy on Twitter was like, hey, you know, the cartel took only a week to apologize for stealing Americans, whereas America, even after 140 something years, hasn't done that. And I told him, you know, America didn't steal Americans from Africa. You get what I'm saying? Like they weren't Americans when they were in Africa. But people like there are actually people who think that, yeah, they stole African Americans. Or even, like when we talk about Jews, in fact, the black Hebrews, they're talking about, oh, the people who were sold to slavery were actually the Jews in Africa. You know? Like, again, like people make up history all the time. And so, you know, if somebody was like, hey, no, that's bullshit. Nobody's like, I think I think what happens is that the Hyksos were a real phenomena and the Hebrews attached themselves to that. And I'm saying people do that all the time. They always, like, they do attach themselves to an older group that has nothing to do with them. In fact, the whole story about Hitler was that he was like, oh yeah, we're the original Aryans. Now the Aryans are a totally different group, right? But like that, like again, like I said, it's just like a regular thing. It's not even like, oh well, this is just like it's almost hard to name a person, especially in the Western mythology, who doesn't make up a history based off of a historical thing. Like today we have like people who write fiction who kind of like mask that tradition, but you'll also find that a lot of early fiction writings that they just kind of bullshit history and just make up people groups. But like, yeah, but like it's pretty common. I'll just say that. Let's see. Buana says, Amani, guys, only the name of the book by Check Out the Job I was looking for is called Black Africa, The Case for a Federated State. Yeah, man, I have that. I read it on YouTube, you know? Like, I read that book on YouTube. So it's like, and I think the book is in the description of that reading. But anyway, so after the Exodus, the Old Testament of the Bible bears ample witness to the Hebrews' aggression towards neighboring tribes, their absolute certainty of righteousness if they serve their God. He was the only true God in a big world filled with many other people and cultures which have their own gods and goddesses. The Bible also, and that's something that is true though. I mean, even though I would say that they're not a real, like when I say they're not a real group, I mean like their history is not 100%. Now their history before is not 100%. Their history after is obviously, you know, real. You know what I mean? So like you could always just form an ethnicity, and that's the thing. That's the thing that I would have trouble with doing. Like when you form an ethnicity and then you just make up an ethnic story that has nothing to do with like reality. Like I would have trouble make up a story that has nothing to do with reality, like a fantastical story. And so the Bible is like a fantastical story. But But like, yeah, people, but like, as far as what happens after they decide we are one people descended from this guy, Abraham, whatever, right? After that, that's when they become, like, they're not a historical people, but they become a people, or a hodgepodge of people, which is something that everybody like does. Like, most of the ethnicities of Africa also have, wild origin stories, but they also they have wild origin stories. Let's just put it that way. But they become people. So like the Kikuyu have stories of coming out of like or they were Gikuyu at the time, but they have stories of like coming out of some mold, like 7 women, and like finding husbands randomly, and coming out of this black earth type thing, which is probably not something that happened, but like they're still a real people. The Kikuyu is still a real people after, whatever form, like whatever the earliest evidence of them is, that's when they become a real people. Or that's like, surely before that they were probably a real people. But like, as far as their origin story, it's probably not real. And it's the same with this Hebrew stuff. It's like their origin story is not real. It's probably it's based off of a real historical invader, but it's probably not them, is what I would say. I mean, most people don't think it's them. All right, so the Bible also bears ample witness to the fact that women had very little social or religious enfranchisement in Hebrew society. Hebrew heroines of the Bible are, almost without exception, women who sacrifice themselves sexually to attacking enemies in order to win some advantage for the Israelites. That was the highest service that women could be conceived of performing among the Hebrews. That's really interesting. So again, like I said, I want people to remember this. I don't want to keep cutting off, but worship. Like, these religious books are like manuals for how to perform wars, or what your role is in a war, or how to think more militarily. This really struck me in the head when I overheard some brother was discussing to me Islam, and he was like, yeah, this Muhammad guy, he turned one people against another, like two of his competitors against each other, and then he was able to dominate the victor or something like that. And it's like they outlined this in the fucking Quran. You know what I mean? Like, they outlined it, like how to freaking win a battle between 3 kingdoms. Reminds me of the Chinese book, the Romance of 3 Kingdoms, something like that, right? Which is it becomes a good video game franchise called Dynasty Warriors or some shit like. But anyway, but yeah, like this right here, like I think I heard. So I think this guy basically be a pastor, but Amos Wilson, he was discussing, like, the way how he was discussing the Bible, I was like, the fuck? This motherfucker knows it. But Amos Wilson is discussing the Bible, and he's like, there's this section where their God is telling them, do not leave any survivors. Like, do not leave any survivors. And so this becomes like some religious mandate to not leave any survivors. And like sticking to that mindset. Or like in this quote unquote Old Testament, they will also talk about charge other people interest, but don't charge your own people interest. Or like basically loan people of your own type money for nothing, but do not loan people who are strangers money for nothing. Get some shit back. Or if you find rotting meat on the floor, right, don't sell it to your own people, but sell it to somebody who's not your own people. These are like worship, group solidarity type mindset, which is like, it's pretty good to spread, to have. The only thing that makes it bad for me is when not the only thing, but like the fantastical part makes it bad, as well as the this is divine, that makes it bad, but outside of that, like worship is a good thing. So the other thing that kind of is mythological, for a lot of us might not know this, is the Battle of Troy, or the Trojan horse thing. Like, the Trojan horse story could have been a story from an older civilization, like how an older civilization won a battle, but it was retold to the people of Greece as if it was their own historical story. Now I'm not. Now, don't quote me on that, because again, like, maybe somebody could. Because again, like, white anthropologists will lie to you anyway. But maybe somebody could say, oh, well, no. Oh, and same thing with Lisa Strada. Like, Lisa Strada could have also been an older story of women who stopped a war by abstaining from sex. and they just rewrote it as a Greek, so on and so forth. And that's like a common history, like a common thing. So what happens with the Bible is that it could just be a collection of war stories rewritten for these Hebrew people to make them seem more interesting and more solid as a people, but also to share wisdom from the ancient world that they might have picked up, or ancient stories that they might have picked up from older generations of people. So that's another reason why it could resonate with you as an African, but also it's another reason why it's not too useful, and it's better for us, I would say, to just go back into the historical record. I actually have these like 3 books that are worth like how much hundreds of dollars that I haven't even opened yet, but they're like supposedly gonna give me a better insight into the ancient Egyptian writings. And actually, I personally like ancient Egypt, but I haven't really been reading it recently. Anyway, let me see what the comments are like. And we're really going slow today, but that's partly because Brother Bakar is gonna I never put my link in my chat. My chest hurts. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I was doing, but my chest hurts. I like to get the Google chat up, but also I guess because I'm reading this article, it's gonna take forever. It's supposed to be like 20 pages, and I'm on page 5, and it's already like an hour and 30 minutes. I don't know if I could even slow down thing. But don't worry, I'll get you, bro. I'm gonna go on your show, Brother Bakari. What up, Oni? Forecast says, he says, or don't enslave your own for life and treat them fair, but you can enslave others. Oh yeah. The Hebrews, like, again, like, that's a warship, so we say worship, I'm going to worship, but there's people are studying how to win wars, how to win battles, or how their ancestors won wars and how their ancestors won battles. The whole idea of do not leave any survivors, like, that's what Africans should have known. The trouble is this, that they do know it, but they learn the Bible differently from other people. But that's what they should have learned when power was being transferred. Now, granted, not leaving any survivors, the way they describe it in the Bible was a little bit more brutal than most of us would want, in the sense of, kill the women and children and the animals. Like, that's kind of blood clot, like really, really fucking like ethnic cleanse. But that's actually what the fucking Americans did to the Native Americans. They killed the animals as well as the women and children. And the same thing they did to the Australians, and I'm pretty sure they were trying to do that to Africans too. Just a FYI. They did want us for labor, but like, again, like they did, like I said, they slaughtered the Australians and they slaughtered the Native Americans. So it's not like a thing. And then here's what happened inside of Haiti, when Dessalines was fighting, I think it's Rochambeau, who's like cousin or some shit, is an American hero, but Rochambeau inside of Haiti, he was like, let's just kill all the fucking Africans, like all the men above the age of 12. Let's just kill all of them and just get new ones from Africa, and he was like, if I win, that's exactly what I was gonna do. And luckily he didn't win. But here's the thing though, a lot of people don't realize that in Haiti he didn't win, but there was like another country that Dessalines quotes that was around that time that we don't know about, but Dessalines knew about, because it was like a neighboring country in the Caribbean where they tried to beat the French or some shit, and the French won and slaughtered everybody. So just and that's another thing to remember too, is that, the way our history works is that you're not going to know as much as your forebears, really about historical events. So whatever island, I can't remember what island it was, but it's interesting. And I actually kind of regret a little bit that I didn't include it in the Book of Power, but it's one of Dessalines' speeches. Anyway, so the Old Testament also records the fact that many early Hebrews retained marked Neanderthal physical traits from their Caucasus Mountain origin. Hairy Esau is known to most Bible readers, but what most of us do not know is that Esau was not alone. Esau-like people were very common among the early Hebrew population. According to the earliest Hebrew commentators, there were enough Esau's to contest Jacob's leadership of the Israeli tribe. Leviticus Rabbah, the oldest exegetical, so this is obviously out of my forte, boys. I mean, people. 'Cause I know somebody's like, yeah, man, Leviticus Rabbah, the oldest, whatever. Exegetical work in Hebrew calls these people the destroyers, the sons of Esau. And Zohar says that they were the beasts within Israel that had to be eradicated. Okay. So there you guys have it. That's interesting. The biblical Hebrews must have come originally. Now, again, I'm not going to read the Bible as a factual document. I do recognize it has historical value, but I'm not going to pretend that it's like a historical resource, So the biblical Hebrews must have come originally from some extremely concentrated source of Neanderthal genetic stock back in those old Caucasus homeland. But unfortunately, not enough is known about early human populations in this area to pinpoint the probable geographical location of Hebrew ancestors. But the many Esau's of the Old Testament and commented on in ancient exegetical works indicate their extreme degree of Neanderthal genetic material in the Israelite tribe. So that's actually pretty interesting, though. One other characteristic of Hebrew culture also testifies to the same thing. Of all known early peoples or nations of Europe and Western Asia, only the biblical Hebrews mounted a concerted effort to establish or retain a purely male-dominant Godhead in their also unique monotheism. Hebrew culture also testifies to the same thing. Of all the known early peoples of nations of Europe and Western Asia, only the biblical had a male. So this is the thing I was going to say, that a lot of people are turning, like, this guy is going to turn us into like Jew haters or something. But it's like, what is he even talking about, right? So the only biblical to establish or retain a purely dominant Godhead in their also unique monotheism. So again, like the Vikings would not be considered monotheistic, I guess. So maybe that's why his thing is going at, but it is what it is. Like, again, this is just so, like, it's just so, all right. So although, like, this is like typical white people. That's why I say, just like, we white people with a grain of salt, because they're trying to make you into pawns, even if they seem like the good ones. And like I said, you could see a video of John Henry Clark where he's, sitting down with this guy, Michael Bradley. All right. So although they apparently suffered frequent lapses of at least part of their people cleaving onto idolatry and even worshiping the goddesses of the neighboring nations, the mainstream of Judaism remained faithful to the one God. And he was commonly known as Adonai, and secretly as vowel sounds that approximated the name Jehovah. This is why vowels are not written in Hebrew and in some other Semitic languages. Now, again, vowels are not in ancient Egypt either. But there's physical, intellectual, emotional, and religious Neanderthal characteristics remained relatively pure and undiluted because of Hebrew cultural and religious taboos against intermarriage with any other people. Yeah, so they're saying that they were pretty pure. But again, if you guys know about the Jews today, like I call them Euro Jews, some of them, like they were obviously diluted people. But elsewhere, the same Black Sea Caucasus people, driven by the floods and by the desperate jostlings of other refugees, began to percolate into the Balkans and Greece in various waves that scholars identify as Mycenaean, Dorian, Thracian, and Ionian so-called Greeks. The decipherment of the so-called Linear B Mycenaean script by Michael Venris in 1954 showed that the Mycenaean languages was indeed basically an early form of the Indo-European dialectic of Greek. It came originally from the Russian Caucasus steppes, but the Mycenaeans were a transitional phase of the Caucasus inundation, a warrior elite who imposed themselves upon a much larger population of indigenous people, or who at least partly adopted the religious conceptions of the conquered natives. We know the Mycenaeans, for example, generally worshipped the great goddess as a supreme deity, although there were also lesser gods and goddesses. So this is actually pretty interesting. Linear B script. So this is anthropology. So they're saying this. The Mycenaeans, so that's really interesting, because some quote-unquote Afrocentrics, if you will say that the Mycenaeans were an ancient African colony of Egypt, right? Like I might have said that a couple of times. So it's actually pretty interesting for this white person to say that it's possible that their script came from the Russian Caucasus. I don't know how much is true, because again, like if you look at the early images of the Mycenaeans, they do look like there's something else going on, but it is what it is. Like I said, it's not that important. But so he's saying that they were the warrior elite who conquered this African population, as opposed to like the more historically, I feel like, backed idea that it's more likely that it was an ancient Egyptian colony. But anyway, but the rapidly subsequent invasions of yet other types of Greek-speaking steppe barbarians, especially the so-called Dorians, entered the goddess-worshipping Mycenaean world and inaugurated a rude Dark Age about 1000 BC. It was within the Greek Dark Age, from about 1000 BC to 700 BC, that the poet, or a collection of poets called Homer, wrote about the Trojan War. We talked about that. The homeward voyages of the Odysseus, and other magnificent seafaring heroes and beautiful heroines of the vanished and glorious Mycenaean age that had flourished about 500 years earlier. So you kind of see that they're also, I guess, I'm not 100% sure what this person's trying to say, but it might be that they're also saying the Trojan War was not like something that Homer witnessed, as opposed to it's just a story written about, like rewritten. I hope that kind of, like, it probably verifies what I was just saying earlier, but again, it's not too important. Let's see. Forecast says there must still be a lot of Esau's beating Israelite 2,000 years later. Perhaps there were not so many of the Caucasus steppe Greeks as was the case with the main Hyksos, Hurrian, Hittite, Mitanni, Hebrew hordes, which seem to have traveled southward along the broad valley of the Euphrates River. Therefore, although they certainly introduced their male sky gods into Greece, they not only tolerated but also accommodated to the prevailing old European goddess-worshipping major religion orientation. Gradually, however, the ancient goddesses, all of whom had originally represented only some aspect of the great goddess, became mere unwilling wives of the invader sky gods. The stormy relationship between Zeus and Hera in the transition to the classical Greek pantheon illustrates the process clearly enough. Okay, again, this is like, I think the word is inductive. I'm just going to go by that. It's like, oh yeah, like confirmation bias kind of thing. And so roughly the same situation played itself out in Italy. Believers in male sky gods from the Russian Caucasus steppes gradually percolated into Europe, went across or around the Alps, and then migrated southward down into the Italian peninsula. They also encountered old European worshippers of the great goddess and her good shepherd, Corsair's son, but they reached an accommodation by which the pantheon of roughly equal gods and goddesses were achieved. Nonetheless, as in Greece, where male Zeus was ruler of all gods and goddesses of Olympus, male Jupiter was chief of the pantheon in Italy. Now again, so in ancient Africa, you also had Ammon, kind of like the Zeus. So it's just, again, it's like he's giving these white folk too much organic, and not taking into account that it's possible that there was this kind of like what I think Chicken Job calls it, the zone of confluence. But there was kind of a engagement, interaction between these two groups that might have formed in a sense of, if you go to Marx, thesis, antithesis, synthesis type thing, But anyway, at about the same time as the Hyksos and Hebrews arrived in biblical Goshen, say about 1700 BC or so, other close relatives of Indo-European speaking Caucasus steppe people reached India from Persia. Known as Aryans, they overran the older so-called Indus cultures presented by the cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, which had been founded by goddess-worshipping people of the old civilizations. There, too, after the Aryan invasion, a great pantheon was established. So I kind of just went over that. But yeah, this is why sometimes I would tell people that these Hebrews are really just Aryans, So it's like at around the same time as the Hyksos and Hebrews arrived in the biblical Goshen, around Palestine, close relatives of the Indo-European speaking Caucasus people reached from India into Persia, known as Aryans, and they overtook. So I actually think if you look at this Hebrew belief system, that it really parallels what the Aryans established in the Indus Valley civilization, and it just seems like this population moved further down. Because if you actually look at where these Hebrews say they came from, they'll tell you they came from Iran. Like they tell you where Abraham was like from Ur. And if you look at where Ur is, it's in Iran, right? So anyway, aside from Greece, Italy, and India, a similar evolution of religion took place all over Europe and Western Asia. Pantheons were established with Initially strong representations by goddesses, as mentioned before. However, only the Hebrews repudiated polytheism and goddesses completely. Right? Is any human psychological insight to be gleaned from this pattern of religious evolution? So again, he's like, the Hebrews were like just the worst of the bad, right? Which is, just an interesting thing for a white person to say. So objectively, one can say that the old religion was somewhat balanced psychosexually because both the great goddesses and the good shepherd were revered, but it was skewed somewhat towards female dominance and was therefore notably peaceful. The Greco-Roman and Indian kind of pantheistic accommodations of gods and goddesses also struck a social, religious, psychosexual balance of sorts, even though it was somewhat skewed. I don't know if that thing minimized for you guys, but it minimized for me. Even though it was somewhat skewed, where was I? Psychosexuals of sorts, even though it was somewhat skewed towards male dominance and was therefore more warlike than the civilization of the goddesses had been. But the retention of pure Caucasus steppe worship of only male sky gods, and especially a monotheistic male sky god, must be considered seriously unbalanced or even disturbed psychosexually. Monotheistic male-dominant societies have always been ruthlessly aggressive because there is no compensating and effective feminine representation in either the godhead or in the earthly culture that conceived the nature of divinity. These observations would seem to be objective facts, not mere personal opinion. It is no accident, therefore, and for example, that the most serious crisis threatening world peace presently is a confrontation between Jews in Israel, supported by Jews in the United States, and Muslim Arabs in the Middle East. He's like, the most serious crisis threatening world peace is this crisis here. Now again, these observations, and like, what is world peace to this white boy? Because like, this got nothing to do with me, but all right. Only in Egypt, northwestern Europe, and Mediterranean islands during Greco-Roman times did the old religions continue to flourish in relatively pure form, with Isis as the great goddess and the Messiah as her good shepherd consort son. Interesting. This Egyptian Christianity survived and developed to become the official religion of Ptolemaic Egypt about 320 BC. Okay, so wait a second. So, old religion continued to flourish, relatively pure, with Isis as a great goddess. It continued to flourish. Okay, I don't really know what he's referencing. But all right. I mean, I almost thought he was talking about. Not that I don't know what he's referencing. I just almost thought he was talking about. The Coptic church, but he's not. It doesn't look like he's talking about it. So he says only in Egypt. This is the old religion. So. The Isis and the Messiah of her good shepherd consort son, which is pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. Anyway, so this version of Messiah worship achieved some popularity in Rome not long before the Christian era because of the emotional impact that Cleopatra had made on the common people of Rome when she entered the city as Julius Caesar's consort. Roman veneration for Isis and the Christ, right? Continued even after Julius Caesar was assassinated. Only when Julius Caesar's legally appointed successor, Octavian Augustus Caesar, defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium did belief in Isis and the Crestus begin AD 19 to be suppressed in Rome. Okay, so within 3 centuries after the lifetime of Orthodox Christianity, St. Paul, or only about 11 generations, barbarians began to overrun the Roman Empire. Called Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, and Vandals in our history books, they were distant relatives of biblical Caucasus steppe people who had fled from the Great Black Sea flood and had invaded Palestine and Egypt as Hyksos and Hebrews about 2,000 years earlier. So he's saying that the same Visigoths who invaded Egypt at one point in time, their distant cousins then invaded and destroyed the Roman Empire, right? And it's not absurd, right? It had become increasingly clear as research into the obscure. And I'm saying it's not absurd just to keep the conversation going. I can imagine somebody sitting, like, oh my gosh, he can't believe he believes this is not absurd. Like, no, it's like, like when it comes to this European history, it's like, I mean, it's interesting to an extent, right? It has become increasingly clear as research into the obscure steppe histories has tediously and slowly progressed that the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, and Vandals were pushed into desperate migration in a kind of domino effect by the terrible Huns to the north and east of the other tribes. Greco-Roman writers first heard of the Huns and mentioned them in AD 272, possibly because of stories told by scattered Visigothic refugees trickling into northern Greece. These Huns were located in the vaguely known lands of the northern end of the Caspian Sea. So for those of you who don't know that Huns, it is now known, however, that the Huns were a Caucasian steppe tribe that had, during the 3rd century BC, made an earlier onslaught against China. The Qin dynasty of that time built the Great Wall in order to hold the Huns at bay. This apparently worked because the Huns then turned westward to return to what seems to have been their original homeland north of the Caspians. But Chinese culture from then onward tended to be inward-looking and not typically expansive. Perhaps they had been seriously intimidated by the Huns. In any event, as late as AD 1325, Chinese maritime expansion was halted by imperial decree for fear of encountering the barbarians that were known to exist in the Middle East. So that's actually pretty interesting. Like I said, there's some facts here that are pretty interesting. So this idea is that after China, so China is like, I guess, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse or not, but China's like, let's say over here, like over here. Damn, I can't even do that. But China's somewhere around here, and they build a wall to block out these people who are invading them, right? And so then these people now go westward. And when they go westward, they encounter the ancient Europeans who also think they're badasses, but they're not badasses like, shoot, arrows with fire, like shoot fire arrows. Like they're badasses like cut off your head with an axe and wear your skin, but not shoot arrows with fire. So they go away and they go invade the Roman Empire. I don't know how they beat the Romans, because I think the Romans were pretty badass too. Not gonna cap. But they beat the Romans in the armor. Probably just, I think the Romans were in decline, honestly. But yeah. So it's just pretty interesting to see geo-history in that kind of way. That's not really typically taught. Because like this right here, this whole idea of, the Chinese were like, you know what? We're not going to go westward because we think there's barbarians there, right? Like, that's a verifiable thing. And it's also like it notes, like this is pretty, like this is actually an interesting part about this whole narrative. But anyway, the Visigoths set into, and that's the thing that's like, when I say inductive versus deductive, and by the way, if you guys hear that sound, it's like my stand is pretty damaged. I don't know what my son did, but he took some of these bolts out, and I don't know where to find the bolts. Actually, I think I know where to find bolts. But anyway, so what I was saying was that, like this is deductive versus deductive, is to say that you might know something to be true, and then you try to rationalize why it is so. But here's the part that's good, the truth. The rationalization of humans, or of white people in particular, is not necessarily usually good, but the facts are valuable, So the Visigoths, set into terrified motion by the Huns, made their debut on the stage of European history at the Battle of Adrianople in Greece in AD 273, where their cavalry thoroughly defeated a Roman army. It soon became apparent that the usual Roman infantry legion was no match for the new Visigoth armored horse warriors, armed with long lances and long swords. So I guess the Romans, like, they had their infantry that were badass, but they were not much toward iron armored horses, So the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Lombards successfully overran Greece and Italy. The Visigoths sacked Rome itself in AD 410. I want people to realize this too. I don't really want to just keep cutting into it, but like, when somebody advances over you militarily, you are in fucking trouble. That's what happened in Africa too. Like, I think it was the Songhai Empire, where they had a really good cavalry, right? I'm not saying Visigoth good, but maybe even better. I don't know, right? Really good cavalry, right? We're talking like 400,000 cavalry. Good number of cavalry. These Europeans came with 2,000 gunmen and wiped it out. And the ancient world was shocked, because they were like, hold on a second. You just had 2,000 gunmen and you defeated one of the largest armies on the planet? Because again, 400,000 soldiers is, and I'm not saying that's the accurate number. I think it is, but I'm not going to say it's the accurate number. But 400,000 soldiers is a lot, even today. Like, America has a standing army of 1 million people. America today has a standing army of 1 million people. Now, not to say that there's only 1 million people in the American military. That's not the case. But what I'm saying is that, like, that's actually a big military. China, again, 1 million people. You know, 1 million soldiers today is a big amount of soldiers, right? So for you to wipe out, so like for in the ancient world, not the ancient, but classical world, for you to wipe out 400,000 people, you know, with only 2,000, it's like, yeah. And like everybody was like, these motherfuckers are sending themselves to die. And it was like, nope, here's the strategy. We're just gonna funnel them. We're just gonna shoot them. We have the bullets. You know, we could do it, right? And then what happens after that is that they erase your people. Shanghai Empire doesn't exist. Neither does ancient Rome. You know, we look at ourselves as victims and all that, you know, and sure, but ancient Rome doesn't exist either. You understand? Like, people are not going to keep you alive after they beat you militarily. The only reason why we think people will keep you alive is because we are for some reason alive. You know what I mean? But like, we are like pretty much the rare survivors. Most people die. You know? And I'm not saying all the ancient Romans were dead. I don't know. I don't really know where the ancient Italian population went. Maybe they're still in Italy. I don't know. Most likely, right? But like, yeah, people tend to like, it's not easy. Like, I couldn't tell you how many freaking Italians died from these Visigoths. I think maybe we can look it up. But it's not a joke. Like, people do fucking slaughter people. The Visigoths sacked Rome itself in AD 410. So, however, the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Lombards, although fierce warriors in their own right, could appreciate civilization to some degree at least, and could be assimilated. Many of these barbarians became officers in the Roman army and became Roman citizens. They helped. So that's what I'm saying. So maybe if you assimilate them, but again, you know, they helped Imperial Rome to develop its own corps of armored cavalry, called in Latin Clibanari, Western Empire, and Cada Fracti, Eastern Empire, with which to oppose the inevitable onslaught of the Huns. All right, so why is this important? So like I said, these are words you can look up. You can look up and verify. That's why it's important. So anyway, what the fuck? Rings. Okay. I was like, all right. Even the fierce and warlike Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Lombards who settled and conquered Rome doubted that the Huns were fully human. According to reports preserved in the chronicles, the Huns were described as extremely hairy goblins with big heads and short legs. Christianized barbarians described them as the scourge of God because of their ruthless extermination of enemies and the hideous atrocities they visited on their hapless captives. And this was interesting because you have these Aryans who are also very vicious and violent, but then this white boy is going to write it as if, oh no, it's actually those Asians. Or I don't know if these are Asians though. I don't really know. I mean, we all think Attila the Hun is an Asian, but anyway. The long-dreaded onslaught came a generation later when Attila led his Huns through Central Europe between AD 449 and AD 551, leaving behind a swath of destruction and genocide. In the latter year, AD 451, Attila's hordes of predominantly mounted bowmen was somewhat surprisingly defeated at the very closely fought Battle of Chalons in central France. The victors were a desperate coalition of Romanized Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, Roman infantry, native Celtic levies, and Teutonic forces from east of the Rhine. The Teutons had already experienced the terror of the Huns, and the rings of the Nibelungen cycle of epic poetry predominantly refers to this conflict. See, I was wondering. I was like, is this Lord of the Rings? Some say it says Lord of the Rings right here. All right. I was like, this looks like, because I just watched Lord of the Rings. I finally decided to watch it. And so I just watched it. And I'm like, why are they talking about rings? And what's interesting, Teutons, for those of you who don't know, this is a game my brother used to play. Everybody, I mean, like, maybe you guys brothers too, I don't know. It's called Age of Empires, I think. And they would have, like, as the best infantry, or the best knights would be the Teutonic Templars or something like that. And so that's where I know this word from. And so, like, you know, white people would just put in their video games. That's what I'm saying. Like, if I were to put in my video games pro-blackness, people would be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You don't know how to sell anything, and blah, blah, blah. But, like, meanwhile, my brother and I, or whatever, were playing games. Like, most of us were playing video games that was bigged up Teutonic, you know, Templars, you know, white history pretty much, you know? But anyway, Teutons had already experienced the terror of the Huns. and as this epic poem I already said. So for those people with literary interest, it's at least interesting, and it may also be of unsuspected social importance that in the year 2000, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings was voted the most important book of the century and the most important book of the millennium by two separate groups of book buyers and readers. One group was British, the other American, and both were polled by a major international book retailer. The epic trilogy is now being made into a 3-part feature film, which has so far released the first 2 parts, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. The Lord of the Rings has smashed all previous theater attendance and box office records. Tolkien's Middle-earth was rather obviously the elder days of the older European Neolithic, megalithic civilization. Now, what's interesting is I started looking into this Tolkien thing, and they're like, he's like, I'm not trying to make it like a history. I just don't like war, you know? So he would probably disagree with this thing, but of course, you know, who cares, right? Specifically, the Shire was meant to be pre-industrial England. The High Elves, who had come from the West, bringing civilization to Middle-earth, were our putative Atlanteans from the West who brought civilization to Western Europe. The eastern realms of Sauron, Mordor in J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, was modeled on a mixture of early medieval Hun Khazars and modern Western industrialism. The soldiers of Mordor were called orcs, which is Gaelic, Irish, the Goendalic branch of the Celtic for pigs. The word Khazar itself also meant pig in the Gothic branch of Germanic and influenced Yiddish, the Yid, Deutsch, or Drew German, so much, and so we'll soon learn the significance of this. Okay. Tolkien therefore told an allegorical but nonetheless true history in his masterpiece. It was the West's ancient and continuing battle against the genetic domination by ferocious Caucasus steppe barbarians. So, all right, so this is pretty interesting because, like I said, I was looking into this this Lord of the Rings thing just as a, you know, entertainment thing, and I think there was like a video that was like, oh, actually these different groups represent different religions, and one of them was like the dwarf. But like the dwarf was like specifically, like according to, like apparently Tolkien was like, I'm not really doing an allegory. I don't do allegories. But he was like, yeah, I think of the Jews as the dwarves, you know? But like other people, the reason why I was looking into that though is because there's this black man who writes, who's like a martial artist, Balagon Ajetonde. So he's like one of the better, black martial artists in terms of like black consciousness kind of thing. He's one of the popular ones, and he wrote like a couple of books, and so he's also into Dungeons and Dragons, right? Even before I was, right? And so his thing was that when he used to play Dungeons and Dragons, he said that white people would make fun of him and say you should play an orc because that's what your race is based off of. So, and that's the reason why I listen to this Tolkien thing where there's like no reference to orcs being black people, but it was something that he heard as a youth. So it's just another interesting thing that, like, pretty much what I'm saying is that everybody's looking into the Lord of the Rings and looking into their own way of, oh, this is what it means and this is what it means. Whereas, like, it might not really be that. Like, some people really think he was just talking about, because he was like a soldier in World War I or something, and he was really just talking about, you know, I don't like war. But who knows? This book is actually not that unimportant, though. It does set the stage for a lot of fantasy books. Although, like that black martial artist would say, the original book to set the stage for black fantasy books, for fantasy books would have been Conan the Barbarian, right? And actually, that's probably a important book too. Let me see what these comments are. Okay, nothing except for everybody just saying what up to each other. Damn, this is long. Whew. All right, so even the civilization of the goddess was reflected in Tolkien's work because such rings of power are still... Like, I hate when people just talk about fucking like pop culture. Like, shut the fuck up. Nobody cares. Unless you're talking about pop culture, in which case I do not want to read it. But if you're just going to give me some generic breakdown and then you just start... Because that's just something that Amos Wilson does too. Which is why I can't vibe with a lot of the older... particularly African American scholars, like a lot of them would just go into the Bible. Like Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben would just always talk about religion. Amos Wilson talked about religion a lot too, or he would just talk about some movie. that like he's like, oh, y'all see that movie that just came out? You know, this and you're like, I don't give a shit about this movie. I'm not going, like, I might watch it after your recommendation, sure, but I'm not looking into movies for truth. So this guy is now just getting giddy over the Lord of the Rings book. Like, dude, like, there's a limit. Like, look how, like this freaking, like, he's mentioning Tolkien even to the end of this page, which is crazy. But all right, I'll read it anyway, because, you know, like I said, I did just watch the movies, right? Even the civilization of the goddess was reflected in Tolkien's work, because such rings of power still had strength to do at least some good in the world, were wielded by high elven queens, Arwen Evanstar of Rivendell and Galadriel of Lothlorien. It can be no accident, therefore, for a man of Tolkien's erudition that the evening star is the planet Venus, and that Galadriel is the elvish name for the morning star, again, the planet Venus. But if you had to read Tolkien's long appendix on the language of the elves to discover this, the Latin word Venus was given to the planet, but the name is interchangeable with Aphrodite, Ishtar, Cybele, and Isis. The planet was named in honor of the great goddess's beauty because of its beauty. Our present symbol for the female sex is also the sign for Venus, and both come from the shape of the ancient Egyptian Ankh, the symbol of life itself. But Tolkien, the Oxford scholar of Teutonic and Celtic lore and literature, knew that even the ancient Egyptian symbol for life, the Ankh, was apparently brought to Egypt along with basic Christianity by Neolithic and megalithic migrants from the Atlantic West. So you see how this white boy is saying that this. See, that's why I was going to skip over this too. But you see how this white boy is saying that the Ankh was brought into ancient Egypt by the Atlantic West. Isn't that crazy? All right. So that's kind of like what? All right. That's what I'm saying. I can't like. I'm saying, like, Dr. Clark walking around with this guy, sitting with this guy, is just kind of like a low key pisses me off. You know, because like this guy is like just ugh. I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about just really quickly. So. Because you guys some of you guys will be like, who is this guy? Michael Bradley? I never heard of him. I'm not going to look through my YouTube history in front of everybody because, you know, sometimes I might click on like a comedy, you know? You know what I mean? You know, and then like, I don't want you guys looking at my comedy history. But anyway, what was I saying? Michael Bradley. So you look up Michael Bradley and like his whole thing is, oh, no, I think he's a football player, too, so I'm going to just put that in Clark. No, it's a different person. Is a football player. So you can't... Yeah, it's the stupid thing. It's so stupid. Yeah, so they're basically right now, they're showing me... You guys can't see it, but they're showing me some football player. So let's see if I can...
Another people have made God
So like I said, like because I knew about these guys, like John Henry Clark and them, like a decade. Some people are like Johnny come latelys. I knew about Johnny Clark and Michael Bradley for like a decade.
Another people have made.
So you see, this is a thing.
1666, the uranium.
So this is
550 BC.
This is who we're reading, Michael Bradley right here.
To the white race, there's quite a bit of scientific evidence to show that they were aggressive before there was very much to be greedy about.
Yeah. So you see, so like my thing is like, I would like read his book. I wouldn't tour with him. Like I'm sorry, I wouldn't. Like it doesn't matter how much you like it. I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. Nope. I mean, I'm not saying I can't say that because I mean somebody did invite me to present my book somewhere, you know. And like, I can't help if in my invitation, I'm sitting down next to somebody who isn't black. You know what I mean? Because like, they could have also invited this other white person. Granted, I'm not saying that John Henry Clark, you know, didn't set up the event and somebody else set it up for him. I'm not saying that. But so I can't really say it. Because again, like even that happened to Umar Johnson, where he I know he did some weird shit where he was like, this beautiful woman right here, and it's a whole transgender. I wouldn't do that. You know what I'm saying? But it is what it is. All right. So anyway, so we have, but like, I mean, sometimes you don't know who you're with. I'm not saying that John Clark didn't know who he was with though, because I think that he did. I never listened to the lecture, so I'll probably listen to it and come back and see if there's any evidence that he knew. But me personally, like, nah. Like voluntarily, nah. I mean, again, if I'm on stage with a white boy, it's different, you know. But voluntarily, no, I wouldn't. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I do remember he does. Like, I think he actually writes the foreword to this book. If I'm not mistaken, I think he actually writes the foreword to Iceman Inheritance. So it's not like this is just like a coincidence. I think that they were like together in some capacity. Yeah. I think so. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember. I mean, again, like I said, this was like 10 years ago that I probably was interested. Somebody in the comments could thing. Forecast says LOL comedy. Yeah, like, you know, I think some stand-up guy was talking about, you know, like, you know, sometimes you just, I don't know how, but like YouTube be like, hey, you might like this, and then you click it, and all of a sudden they just keep sending you shit. I mean, you know, and there's also that in Nyash, you know what I'm saying? No, I'm joking. I don't know. Although I think one time somebody did send me some video of Nyash, and I don't know. YouTube was just like, no. I think what happened one time, I was hanging out with these brothers on Discord, and then like they started talking about, hey, you know what female athletes look really good, and you know now to this day, if you go to my homepage, you're gonna see, you know, look at this athlete right here, and you're like, you know, I don't want to see that right now. Like, you know what I'm saying? I still click it, but no, I'm joking. I'm messing up. Okay. But yeah, let's see. But Tolkien and the Son of Sword that was apparently brought to whatever. We have covered this west to east maritime migration in the historical perspective, Light from the West. First section of this presentation is the basic rationale of the Jesus voyage. All right. So again, he's like, I mean, come on. The Ankh was brought to ancient Egypt from the west. Like, come on, dude. All right. But as well of like the ancient symbol in ancient Egypt was brought by these motherfuckers. Like, come on. Like, I wouldn't even like that's a get out of my fucking chair. So a very well-known German scientist with the unfortunate name of Dr. Otto Muck. So I don't know how that's an unfortunate name. Went further than Tolkien. Muck suggested that the shape of the Celtic cross, the Ankh, and our symbol for both the planet Venus and the female sex all derive from and are slight distortions from the city plan of Atlantis as described by Plato. The Jesus voyage will illustrate the similarity of these symbols, but for the moment you can return to Paul Schliemann's dubious map of Atlantis on page 19 and see for yourselves that Otto Muck's argument is clever, even if it may not be true. Why did this man go at this man's name? Like, that's so unprofessional. Like, the unfortunate name of Dr. Otto Muck. Maybe I don't know what Otto Muck means, but, like, I wouldn't even put this. The German scientist with the unfortunate, like, that's just, like, what's wrong with this guy? Like, not only can you not trust his, like, his whole argument is white folk are psychopathic or some shit. This is some psychopath shit, because it's like, why did you just say the unfortunate name of Otto Muck? That's funny. Oh man, this guy does got me laughing though. I ain't gonna hold you. So I think actually sounds like I might even be laughing if I were to listen to this, not from a serious paradigm. Because the little clip, this is the first time I actually heard him speak, I guess. And the little clip I just heard where he's like he sounds like something Dr. Clark would say. You know, they had nothing to be greedy about. Like, okay. Therefore, Tolkien was apparently correct in naming his elven queens after the planet Venus and the western goddess. The good shepherds are also well represented in The Lord of the Rings. Gandalf, the wizard, and the Strider, the disguised King Aragorn of the West, escort the vulnerable hobbits towards Mordor. Perhaps it is not going too far to think of the hobbits as innocent and pretty ignorant sheep. Poor Frodo, the ring bearer, carried what seems suspiciously like the Orthodox Christian burden of original sin, being Bilbo's heir. Okay. Well, to be fair to Tolkien, he disliked and mistrusted allegorical interpretations of his work. which have not prevented many people from making them, including me. Yeah, okay, thanks for telling us this now. But anyway, however, I have, and I just told you guys this, right? However, I have had the great honor and immense advantage of corresponding with Robert Graves during his last years of Majorca. Graves had been a special friend and confidant of Tolkien, and they had often discussed The Lord of the Rings because it had so much resonance with Graves' own work. Graves received one of the first copies of the Iceman Inheritance, and he wrote, through his wife Beryl, because he was too ill, that the theory was the history that Tolkien had chosen to tell in an allegorical form. Interesting. I mean, so I guess this is not bad, you know? Now, I don't know if this is true, but it's not bad. Therefore, I'll stick to my guns at my interpretation of The Lord of the Rings, and to continue with it soon, I think it will become very clear why Tolkien very obviously equated Huns and Khazars with rampant Western industrialism. Now, somebody does say that the orcs and so on and so forth, like another person, like there's another video on YouTube that says, I think it's Cracked. Cracked is like a comedy, humorous thing. And I think they're saying that the like if like Tolkien like one of these groups represents the Middle Eastern people, like there's people that ride in on horses and stuff like that, and they represent the Middle Eastern people, and you know, one of the other people say, well, why do they seem to be holding technology and all that kind of stuff, and then the other person corrects them and says that if you were a historian in Tolkien's time, you'd be more familiar with how the Middle Easterners had better technology than the Europeans at the time, you know? So that's another thing to remember, is that realistically, like, depending on where you are in history, like today you might be like the Europeans have the best history or the best technology, but if you were like 400 years ago, you would have recognized that the Arabs had the best technology, you know, at the time. You know, and of course, before that, you would have had the Africans having the best technology. But, you know, like, again, like, times have changed. So let's see. Bit of medicine says, I knew it was Nash. Nah, it wasn't, nah, you know. Medicine says, we are not going to partner with white people to solve African problems. Exactly. No, never. Forecast says, Matron and me and Erica are supposed to do a live tonight on how the medical field do black women. If you have something to say about it, you should come on, right? Okay, yeah. I can talk about Nash. Matter of fact, Bit of Medicine can talk about Nash. I joke, a Bit of Medicine, we always see, no, I'm just messing. All right, let's go. Therefore, I'll stick to my guns, blah, 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 blah. Oh, and continue with it soon. I think it's very clear why, obviously, equated Huns and Khazars with rampant Western industrialism. What may be considered surprising is the immense and overwhelming popularity of The Lord of the Rings by a generation of the apex of our technology. This may indicate a strong subconscious desire to rediscover the West's true history, and at least partly to return to its original values and religious orientation. A lot of people also say that The Lord of the Rings is very Christian allegorical, because the guy who wrote it was like really religious, like really, really Christian. And so he's like condemning non-religious folk. And like the Shire more represents people who are like kind of just not religiously disciplined. You know, they're just chill, and they're just simple. As opposed to, I think the elves would have been the like religious people who eventually go to heaven at the end. There's a lot of ways to interpret it, you know? Anyway, so this may indicate a strong subconscious desire to discover the West's true history, and at least partly to return to its original values and religious orientations. President George Bush should reflect that the great social change might be taking place at the very time that he is trying to equate war and U.S. industrial globalization with the American way of life. Now Biden would have been like, yo, fuck, man, he's going to Ukraine. But this is the timestamp right here. So if you want to know when this article was written, it's during the time that George Bush was president. I don't know if it's the first one or the second one. I'm guessing the second one, but this is when it was written. And I'm just mad. We only went through halfway. I feel like I should probably just do a part 2 instead of continue with this story because it's kind of long. Yeah, I think I'll just do a part 2. Perhaps the nominally Roman, but like that's another thing I want to say. I just hate that people would do this with our time, where they would just like start talking about, you know, whatever book, you know, like whatever fiction that they, you know, like pop culture. Like I said, like the same thing. I noticed that with Amos Wilson too, and like other black scholars. Like I don't know if I vaguely remember Malcolm X might have been like, you saw that movie, and then you just start talking about a movie, and it's like, I mean, I get it to some extent, but I also do not like, unless your whole thing is I'm going to talk about a movie, like, I would not, you know? Like it's different. Like, for instance, like, let's say we're going to shoot The Breeze, and then somebody puts up a movie clip, and then we discuss the movie clip. That makes a lot more sense because we're already shooting The Breeze. But if you're doing a serious conversation, and then you decide, actually, you know what? I want to talk about a movie. It's like, I didn't come here for this. You know, now granted, I never showed up to this, like, this person's not writing for me. But I actually, as a matter of fact, I could even say that other brother did that too. Kemi Saba, he has this presentation where he just starts going into the movie Inception. Did make me want to see the movie Inception, and it was really brief for him. But like, my thing is that just don't talk about movies. I mean, like, just don't. It's just not even a thing. Like, I would suggest that. Now, granted, these people are more influential than me, so maybe you should follow what they're doing and talk about movies. But people like me are turned off. I'll just say that. And now, granted, you might not care if I'm turned off, but you know, maybe you do. All right, but we must return momentarily to the Huns because of their unsuspected importance to the modern Western world and even today's newspaper headlines. Perhaps the nominally Roman participants at the Battle of Charlon were surprised at their bloody victory. They were certainly relieved. The Huns trickled back through Central Europe to their former homeland near where the Volga River empties into the Caspian Sea. The Roman victors at Chalon were not anxious to follow them for a rematch. Attila, High King of the Huns, died in the Volga capital in AD 453. Like the Hebrews themselves and back in Palestine about 2000 BC, these later Caucasus steppe Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Lombards, and Vandals of the 3rd to 5th century AD had a male-dominant mindset and worshipped male sky gods. Visigothic Thor was not very different from the Judaic Jehovah, for example. And just like the Hebrews, they tended to reject the idea of any serious reverence for goddesses. Among those invading barbarians, as among the biblical Hebrews previously, and still, ordinary women had little enfranchisement in their societies because there was no strong female representation in their cultural conception of divinity. Orthodox Judeo-Christianity of the Roman Church grew at phenomenal speed during the first few centuries AD. This was partly because the European Constantine accepted it as an official religion of the Roman Empire in AD 3077, but it was also perhaps the already encroaching barbarians were genetically and emotionally predisposed to accept its male savior and male godhead. So I think I'm going to end there. Like I said, but let me just check, because this is page 10 of 20, and since, you know, it's already, like, let me just check to see if this is a full 10 pages. Yeah, it looks like it's a full 10 pages. So, it looks like it's 9 pages. But all right, so yeah, I'm just gonna end right here because I don't think I'm gonna go through it too quickly. So that's pretty much the end of the podcast in that perspective. We can continue this next time. Maybe I'll go back over this paragraph. But I would say this is really important, that the state can spread the religion pretty easy. So this is partly because of Emperor Constantine spreading the religion. Now, he also says that the religion has to have some predisposition, so on and so forth. But again, I don't even know to what extent that's even valid. I mean, it sounds good theoretically, but I think realistically the state can infuse so on and so forth. So Forecast says this is good information. He's complimenting a white boy. I don't know about that. I don't know about Forecast. I'm saying it's shit, you know, but what is? I'm just messing. Major says the problem is that the movies have the marketing in minds of our people. Yeah, exactly. You know, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I see that, you know. Well, like, I just, me personally, I hate it. Like, it's different. Like, I never listen to this guy, Phil Valentine. But at least with regard to Phil Valentine, he would openly say, hey, I'm going to teach you the hidden message in the Matrix. You know? Now, or I'm going to this is the secrets behind the Avatar, you know? Like, when he says that, I'm like, okay, good. I wasn't going to tune in anyway, right? I wasn't going to tune in anyway. But at least he goes up front and says it. You know what I mean? Like, the way how, like for instance, the Amos example would have been like, you know, well, I mean, I don't know how people on YouTube might have like changed the name of his presentation, but it might be like, you know, the secret to Black Power. You know, you're like, yes, let me go tune into this. And then he's like, see, if you watch The Matrix, you're like, wait, what the fuck? Now, of course, The Matrix wasn't out when he was alive, but it's like, no, I don't want you to do that. If anything, I want you to be upfront and be like, we're going to do a movie analysis. When you're upfront and you say we're going to do a movie analysis, makes me know not to tune in. But if you're telling me, oh, we're going to talk about, you know, let's say, like, we go to Forecast, we talk about Mississippi thing, and then you start telling me about the Avatar movie, it's like, come on. Just like this article where it's like, we're talking about Western, like we're talking about genetics and Western religions and so on and so forth, and then you start talking to me about Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, it's like, come on. And granted, I'll say it wasn't that much. It was only like maybe one page. But still, it's like, yeah, I'm not interested in Tolkien. Like, I'm not interested in this fiction. But now, granted, I did happen to watch the movies just before this, but it is what it is. But anyway, Forecast is correct in saying he's talking about the presentation. We just waiting for Kofi to say it was a good presentation, then we good. But other than that, I'm just messing. Other than that, yeah, fam, thanks for tuning in. We're gonna probably continue this same one next week. Hopefully it's shorter. Maybe I'll drop the link. But we'll just go on Bakari's program or Forecast program. Make sure you guys check out Bakari and Forecast. Matron's going to be on Forecast. Also, I think Harsh Reality is going to be today, so make sure you guys check that out. And you guys can see the good Lero. She's going to be there. Sankata says movies can be a substitute for lazy research. And yeah, that's exactly. Like, not just that. It's also like you just watching a damn movie. Like, and at the end of the day, it's like, just watch the fucking movie. Like, if you want to watch a movie to be entertained, just watch the movie. Don't necessarily walk away from it like this is gospel truth. Like, you could say that there's some true principles that can apply to it, but don't go. And like, another thing is just don't waste people's time with your entertainment fetishes. You know what I mean? Like, if I play through Final Fantasy and at some point Final Fantasy, they're like, hey, we got to kill all these people and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you guys see? Like, if I just start talking in the middle of this, like, oh, yeah, so if y'all play Final Fantasy 7, you'll see that Sephiroth, like, shut the fuck up. Nobody cares about my Final Fantasy. Nobody cares if I play Final Fantasy 7. If I play Final Fantasy 7, like, and I don't. But, like, if I do, like, I just keep it to my fucking self. Like, if you're, like, my thing is this. Respect the African circle. And if anything, just talk about African media. But if you must talk about the movies and stuff, either set it up where it's like, hey guys, I'm going to discuss the secret message between inside of Final Fantasy 7. Then it's like, okay, I'm not going to fucking tune in because I don't give a shit. Or it's like, yeah, boy, I'm going to go listen to that because I played Final Fantasy 7 too, right? But, or like Mass Effect or some shit, right? But like, I'm not supposed to just go in on some rant about, like, if I'm like, hey guys, I'm going to tell you how to fix your school district. And then it's like, and so in Mass Effect, what they do is like what the fuck? like nobody cares. Like, nobody, because the thing is that the reason why I say nobody cares is because not everybody's into your little fetish. So just let people know, like, we're into the app, like, we're into the pro-black, we're into the African stuff, but we're not into your fetish. You know what I mean? Sure, some of us watch movies, some of us play video games, some of us play basketball, some of us, so on and so forth, play sports, watch sports or whatever, but not all of us do. We're not into your Bible, we're not into your religion. A lot of us are just not. Malcolm X actually says, hey, look, keep your religion in the closet. It's the same as that. Keep your entertainment in the closet. You like anime, you like Naruto, that's cool. But don't, bring it into a Pan-African discussion per se. Like, and if you do, like, be very brief, very general. That's all I'm gonna say. But anyway, that's all I could do. Next week we can probably finish it. I wish I could finish it, but I can't. I mean, I could, but it's probably better to split it up. But other than that, Shamem Hotep, Anku Ja, Seneb Neb, Amen, Ma'at, Dua, Necher.